Recording.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will ask my colleagues to unmute and please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Because this is a remote meeting, I am going to ask Ms. Sullivan if she could please call the roll.
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. DeRujo,
Here.
Dr. Rivera,
Here.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes. Here.
Mr. Tran, Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes,
Everyone is present with the exception of Mr. Tran.
thank you. Mr. Tran did let me know he was not going to be able to join us this evening. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion for the school committee to adjourn to an executive session for the purposes of conducting a strategy session related to collective bargaining with the Boston Teachers Union. To have this discussion in an open meeting could have a detrimental effect on the committee's bargaining position. The committee will return to public session at 5 p.m. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Moved.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. DeRujo,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. At this time, I'm going to ask my fellow members, the superintendent and pertinent staff to log off from this public session and join the executive session using the Zoom link sent out by Ms. Sullivan, and I'll see you all in a moment. Good evening, everyone. The committee just returned from an executive session for the purpose of conducting a strategy session related to collective bargaining with the Boston Teachers Union. Tonight's session is being shared live via Zoom. It will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and also on YouTube. For those of you joining us on Zoom or at a later date, you can find tonight's meeting documents posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee under the April 7th meeting link. The agenda, presentations, and equity impact statements have been translated into all of the major BPS languages. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they are finalized. The committee is pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabo Verdeano, Cantonese, Mandarin, and Vietnamese. After I ask the interpreters to introduce themselves, we will activate the interpretation icon, the globe at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. I'd like to ask our Spanish interpreters, Mr. Bernal and Mr. Dominguez, if you could please introduce yourselves and invite our Spanish-speaking audience to switch their Zoom channel into Spanish.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan Bernal. I am the Spanish interpreter, one of the interpreters assigned to interpret simultaneously in Spanish tonight. I will now proceed to explain how to access the interpretation icon in Spanish for all the Spanish speakers. Muy buenas noches para todos. Mi nombre es Juan Bernal. Soy uno de los intérpretes simultáneos asignados a la reunión de hoy. Voy a estar interpretando con mi colega Randolph Domínguez en intervalos de 30 minutos cada uno. Aquellas personas que necesiten accesar la interpretación en español tienen que buscar el globo que aparece en la parte baja de la pantalla, hacer un clic en el idioma español para que puedan escuchar la versión de nosotros de la interpretación simultánea en español. Muchas gracias. Aquellas personas que tengan un teléfono celular también van a ver 3 puntos en la parte de arriba de la pantalla del teléfono. Hacen un clic y seleccionan la interpretación para español. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Good evening, everybody in the meeting. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser uno de los intérpretes simultáneos. Voy a estar trabajando, como ya dijo mi colega, el señor Juan Bernal, en intervalos de 30 minutos. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.
Gracias. Our Haitian Creole interpreters, if I could ask Mr. Saint Hilaire and Ms. Sully, if you could please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Haitian Creole.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire and moi pour essayer faire être en solution pour jeudi, c'est moi-même Nadège qui a assuré traduction et nous demandons pour pas hésiter pour adresser tout ça que vous avez pour adresser avec nous et puis n'a pas traduire pour et que nous demandons ou regarder en bas l'écran là ou appuyer dans globe ou cliquer sur lui sous besoin d'entrer dans la conversation et que même genre que moi-même moi zélé pour me faire traduction pour n'a déjà fait le même genre m'a fait jusqu'à 7h30 et puis 7h45 et puis n'a déjà prend là pour continuer pour reste là. Si vous avez une question, pas hésiter à entrer dans le dialogue là et puis pour participer. Nous remercions à l'avance. Merci beaucoup. Merci, madame.
Good evening, Madam Chair, distinguished guests. My name is Nadège Sully. I am your Haitian Creole interpreter. Bonsoir tout le monde. Bonsoir communauté haïtienne. Moi, c'est Nadège. Moi-même avec Sergio Aswea, à pipoter en traduction en créole. Et si vous avez une question, pas oublier faites-nous connaître aussitôt que possible. Choisis bouton créole haïtien pour nous capables de nous questionner. Et comme Sergio fait dit nous, moi, j'ai commencé à traduire pour nous à partir de 7h45. Moi, j'espère que tout le monde va porter attention à la réunion ça et merci pour participation. Thank you, everyone.
Merci. Our Cabo Verdeano interpreters, Ms. Mendez and Ms. De Silva, if you could please introduce yourselves and provide Zoom instructions in Cabo Verdeano.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is Isabel De Silva, Portuguese Canadian interpreter. Eu sou Isabel, português intérprete e crioulo. Se você mestre qualquer coisa, bota chamam. Na tela de bu telefone tem globo que está mostrando lá de baixo, bota siga naquele lá para poder olhar. E depois naqueles 3 pontinhos que está lá também, bota pode clicar na ele, na lado direito, bota pode copiar com nós. Boa noite e tem boa hora. Se precisa de mim, é só falar naquelas horas. Good night and have a nice evening.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lydiana Mendez, and I will be your Cape Verdean Creole interpreter tonight. Alô, sim, boa tarde. Meu nome é Lydiana, tá sendo intérprete de simultâneo hoje de tarde. Então, se você quer usar por preferência de idioma, na parte de baixo, você segue naquele globo lá e depois você faz a preferência de língua e não está ali disponível para nos ter assistência. E também nos tem 30 minutos, Mico e Isabel, meus tópicos foram diferentes e nós nos compartilha para nos fazer assistência de Cabo Verde Crioulo. Obrigado, boa tarde. Thank you very much.
Obrigado. Our Cantonese interpreters, Ms. C and Mr. Yin, if you could please introduce yourselves and provide instructions in Cantonese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Anna. Terry and I will be providing simultaneous interpretation for the meeting tonight. 大家好，我係 Anna， 我係今晚為你提供廣東話同步翻譯嘅。如果你想聽到廣東話同步翻譯嘅時候咧，你見到熒光屏有個地球儀，你點個地球儀揀 Cantonese， 咁你就聽到廣東話同步翻譯噶啦。Thank you. Your turn, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, this is Terry. I'll be your Cantonese interpreter. 大家好，我係 Terry，我係你嘅廣東話翻譯。啱先阿 Anna 講咗啦，你哋可以喺個屏幕下邊點個地球，之後揀 Cantonese 就可以聽到廣東話嘅翻譯啦。如果你係手機或者 iPad 咧，你可以點下個3個點，之後選擇更加多，之後你哋都可以選擇到呢個翻譯嘅功能嘅。OK， 唔該晒 ，Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And another time I want you to teach me how to say thank you, but we'll do that next time.
謝謝。
So our Mandarin interpreters are Ms. Wang and Wei Li. If you could please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Mandarin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 欢迎大家，今天晚上我和我的同传搭档李伟会一起给您提供普通话的翻译。如果您是刚上线的话，那我们有普通话和广东话。那么请一会儿看到他们提供翻译这样那个地球仪出来的时候，你可以选择普通话，或者是如果您需要的话，可以选择广东话。那好，现在请我的同传搭档李伟来介绍。Go ahead, please, Wei.
大家晚上好啊，我是李伟啊，我是跟这个 Tina 今天一起搭档做同传做这个普通话的这个同传翻译如果你是用这个电脑的话呢，你可能会看到这个屏幕底部有一个地球仪的标志，你就选这个普通话Mandarin 这个选项，你就可以听到进到我们的频道里面就听我们同传如果你是通过手机智能手机的话呢可能这个 Zoom 的话它是用一个3个点你就点这个3个点，然后就进到这个普通话的这个频道，就可以听我们的翻译。好，祝你们晚上愉快。OK， all right.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreters are V Phuong Le and Duyen Tru. If you could please introduce yourselves and give Zoom instructions in Vietnamese, please.
Good afternoon, my name is Duyên, I'm Vietnamese interpreter for tonight. Xin chào các anh chị, nếu anh chị cần thông dịch người Việt liên tục thì xin bấm vào quả cầu và chọn ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt. Chúng tôi sẽ cung cấp thông dịch liên tục cho các anh chị. Xin cảm ơn, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is V. I'm the Vietnamese interpreter for tonight. Kính chào quý vị, tôi tên là Vi. Tôi và chị Duyên sẽ là thông dịch viên của quý vị. Vào buổi tối ngày hôm nay, nếu mà quý vị cần thông dịch viên người Việt, xin bấm vào quả cầu ở dưới màn hình và tìm tiếng Việt để có thể có thông dịch viên cung cấp tiếng Việt cho quý vị biết. Thank you. Cảm ơn nhiều. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all of you for assisting us this evening in our meeting. We regret that this evening we were unable to secure American Sign Language interpreters. We have turned on the closed caption feature and look forward to having ASL interpreters at our next meeting. We're now going to activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. And I just want to remind everybody to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. So thank you everyone who signed up for public comment this evening. Sign up for both public comment periods closed today at 4:30 p.m. Please make sure that you are signed into Zoom under the same name that you used to sign up for public comment. You can use the Zoom tools to rename yourself so that the committee staff will be able to recognize you when it comes time to call on you. And thank you in advance for your cooperation. Before we move into our regular business this evening, I just wanted to say a few words about something that is on a lot of our minds lately, which is MCAS. The school committee shares the concerns we have heard from students, families, and teachers about the implications of MCAS testing this year. The vice chair and I have been in communication with Commissioner Riley, and we have shared with him that we support the superintendent's position on MCAS. That position is that this pandemic year, MCAS should be canceled. Students should not be asked to participate in summative standardized tests when we know the effects of the pandemic will impact student performance. DESE's recommendation to revise the timeline for identifying comprehensive and targeted support schools already acknowledges this. Students in Boston will be better served with information from formative school and district-specific assessments in addition to other local data. If MCAS is not canceled, we believe strongly that the test should only be used as an assessment and not as a high-stakes accountability tool. We urge the commissioner to further reduce the stakes of assessments this year by excluding their use from students' final grades, grade promotion decisions, educator evaluations, and local school ratings. We also shared this message with Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona, who visited us last week. We are also in regular communication with the Massachusetts Association of School Committees and the Council of Great City Schools, a national advocacy organization for large urban school districts on which Vice Chair O'Neill serves as the chair of the board. We are pleased with the commissioner's recent recommendation to exempt this year's 11th graders from passing MCAS in order to graduate from high school. We urge the commissioner to go further by canceling MCAS or reducing the stakes of assessments this year. Our students and families are reeling from a year of unprecedented learning interruption, and now is the time to come together to support our students and begin our recovery so that we can emerge stronger than before. On another note, I am happy to announce that the Boston Student Advisory Council has selected a member to be their student representative on the school committee. This will be formalized by our mayor, Kim Janey. And once that is formalized, we look forward to having this young person join us at our next meeting on April 28th. We'll now move on to the approval of the minutes of March 24th, 2021 school committee meeting. And at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair O'Neill. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. DeArujo,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tran, Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes.
The minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. We're now going to move on to the superintendent's report, and I present to you our superintendent, Dr. Brenda Cassellius.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members, for being here with us in our listening audience. I'm excited to be with you this evening to share some highlights and recent events around the district. But I want to first start out by recognizing that today is Paraprofessional Day. As you know, I started my education career as a paraprofessional for special education students. I'm never going to forget that experience. It was quite valuable, and I think every member of our team is valued and important, and I just want to make sure that I acknowledge our paraprofessionals and appreciate all that they do every day for our educators, for the staff, and most importantly, for our students and families. Last week, I penned an op-ed for the Boston Globe titled "A Renewed Vision for Boston Public Schools." I intended that this op-ed would be in part a reflective review of where we've been this past year. Also to just kind of learn from the past year and review our strategic plan, see where we're headed, and be able to outline kind of our way forward and moving forward. Our approach to tackling our current inequities, which exist within Boston Public Schools, include our focus that we put on our budget, which is return, recover, and reimagine. It's a return to our rollout of our 5-year strategic plan, which of course allocated $100 million investment from our former Mayor Walsh. And then also recognizing the opportunity right in front of us for the federal stimulus funding to rebuild BPS, to make us better, to better create an equitable experience for our students across schools and help us get to the promises we made in our strategic plan. So part of that work and what I was trying to share is, one, we have emergent work right in front of us, which is a very strong return coming April 26th with our 5-day expanded learning, in-person learning for our students. Then launching a summer program in partnership with our Boston After School and Beyond partners. And we'll work throughout the school year then to work with our educators, our school leaders, our students, our parents, in joint task forces so that we can have a strong return this fall. And so we outlined some of that in the op-ed so that we can focus on acceleration and giving our students the boost that we think that they will need. We're also really going to take a sharp focus on the social emotional well-being of our students so that we can heal, we can reconnect, and we can rebuild community, because this is a top priority for our staff and our teachers and our school leaders and our families who have asked us to just pause and take some time to be sure that we are taking care and attending to our own human needs of comfort and belonging. We're also going to support our students and families and stakeholders in the leadership of the City of Boston as we continue to reimagine what our school district looks like. And this is the work within our strategic plan to help us create excellent and equitable education from preschool all the way through post-secondary. We'll continue to better access our high learning childhood education and make sure that students have the opportunity to get a great start, and that we open up additional seats and also partner with some of our CBOs, our community-based programs, to have supportive pathways for the Universal Pre-Kindergarten Connector program. Additionally, we're reviewing our grade configurations with our Build PPS so that we limit transitions for students, invest in all of our comprehensive high schools to offer opportunities for rigorous academics, athletics, arts, and co-curricular programming, having children be well-rounded and having opportunity and access within their classrooms and their schools to a broad range of programming is what parents have said that they want. And we think that this new funding gives us the opportunity to build some of those programs within our schools. There's been a lot of interest in this federal relief funding for K-12 education. And although we haven't yet received our allocation or guidance from the state, we have begun to think through how that funding could be used, which we anticipate is probably going to be around $275 million back of the napkin. And we have currently in CARES 2 funding about $123 million. So over 3 years, we have the opportunity with about $400 million to really support our core strategic direction that I just spoke about. We want to do that in collaboration with our community. I know that you all have been getting a lot of calls saying, how are you going to spend the money? How are you going to hold the superintendent accountable? I want to assure the community that we will have a community process for this funding. We will invest this funding in children's success. We will put a sharp focus on equity and make sure it goes through our equity tools, and make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable, and that at the end of 3 years, we can deliver on what it is we intend and say that we want to do for children. We're currently planning to use the funding in 4 different areas. The first is to continue to provide and ensure for the health and safety of our students as we return. We also are going to direct support to schools and allow them to have some say in how they support student recovery. We also will have some centralized and equitable supports that we deploy out from central office that we feel are needed for everyone. And then we're going to set aside some funding for partnerships and contracts to leverage our community assets and have our community invest in the success of our students in our schools. As we do that, we need to remember that the funding is one time. So we're got to be really cautious about the funding investments, that they don't lead to funding cliffs where you've hired a bunch of staff. We saw this with the funding, ARA funding that was available during the Obama years, and that stimulus funding. People rushed and hired staff, and then just a few years later, we're finding that they had to do a lot of layoffs. We do not want to get in that situation. So where we think that we need to make investments for the long term, we will use that $100 million in our operating funds, or we will need to go to the city and ask for some additional revenue in order to continue those promising practices for beyond the 3 years that this money is available for. As you know, this pandemic has revealed deep inequities in our system. It's especially true for our facilities. And although we can use some of this money for small facility upgrades for health and safety and some improvements, the major capital investments that we want to make will be discussed in our May meeting when we review our capital planning and also the vision for a more comprehensive overhaul of our school buildings through our Build PPS. If you want to read the op-ed in full, you can visit bostonpublicschools.org/renewed-vision. I was pleased to hear you speak, Madam Chair, a little bit about the Secretary's visit. It was a wonderful visit. Miguel Cardona was able to visit Boston, and it was his first stop on his Help Is Here tour, which is focused on learning from school districts across the country about their successful strategies for reopening. Together last Tuesday, we visited the Tynan Elementary School in South Boston. We were joined by Mayor Janey, Madam Chair Oliver Davila, and Tynan Principal Leslie Gant and her staff for a roundtable discussion about the district's response to the pandemic, our plans for the anticipated federal stimulus funding, and the importance of returning students to in-person learning as safely and rapidly as possible. I can't thank Principal Gant enough and her staff and all of the Tynan students for being so welcoming to our special guest. Tynan staff members provided important perspective and insights about the challenges they encountered this past year and how their individual roles were crucial to the entire school community coming together and returning strong. After a visit to the Tynan, we stopped by our BPS vaccine clinic at the BCYF Gallivan Community Center in Mattapan. Vice Chair O'Neill joined us, and Secretary Cardona was able to view firsthand the care and efficiency with which we administered the COVID-19 vaccine to our K-12 workforce, including educators, bus drivers, custodians, and other critical staff. And I can't thank Jerlene Johns enough and Megan Costello for their incredible work and the whole team that came together and our nursing staff for how well this has gone off with our vaccines. I believe Secretary Cardona was incredibly impressed by the resolve and intentionality and compassion that Boston Public Schools has used to approach our multifaceted solutions during this incredible time, difficult time in our school district and our nation. And it's a testament to the incredible work of all of our educators, school leaders, and staff that Boston was held up as a national example for reopening schools. Although we've had troubles along the way, it's been difficult and challenging. I've always said that I am incredibly proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish together, that we will look back in this moment and we will see how resilient and how strong and creative and nimble we were, and that anything is possible. And indeed, Boston is a city on a hill and will continue to lead as a shining example of excellence and resiliency as we have throughout history. On Thursday, April 1st of last week, I notified employees of some staffing announcements and organizational shifts. I arrived at this organizational structure outlined here based on several months of analysis, working to thoughtfully align our leadership team in order to fully execute our strategic plan in the weeks, months, and years ahead, as well as to better align our work for a strong return and a strong recovery. This alignment will help us bring coherence to the work, bring greater and better accountability, role definition, and will help us better communicate both internally and externally to our stakeholders. I appreciate the feedback of committee members during my public evaluation, and these strategic moves are in pursuit of one of my key goals that the school committee had for me, which was to structure the organization and the leadership team to equitably advance student outcomes. These shifts will provide BPS with the alignment needed to support our school leaders and their teams, our families and community partners, and most importantly, we created a position that will support our students specifically and their recovery. It'll also ensure that we return well, recover strong, and reimagine what's possible for our district. In that vein, we've created 2 new positions, the Chief of Schools and the Chief of Student Support, which I will detail shortly. Earlier this week, Indira Alvarez joined us as Chief Operations Officer. Indy has 20 years of experience in public service, most recently serving as interim commissioner for the City of Boston's Property Management Department. She has also served in senior leadership roles at the Inspectional Services Department and has a strong social work background. So I'm very excited to welcome her to the team. Also, as of Monday, Sam DePina, with his vast knowledge of the district and operations, will be serving as interim deputy superintendent while we search for a permanent deputy superintendent who we aim to have in place by July 1. Once that role is filled, Mr. DePina will transition back to being the Chief of Student Support and aligning the teams and departments that provide non-academic support to our students. This will focus our student recovery work and increase the alignment of our partnerships with students, allowing us to be very intentional about supporting the whole child and supporting the work of our families and our hub community school model. The organizational chart on your screen is effective April 26, 2021. Some key highlights. I've asked Andrea Zayas to work with principals, and she will serve as school superintendent. Her experience as school superintendent at this time for our students is critical. She has been critical in focusing on the science of reading and aligning the academics team to support rigorous and culturally and linguistically sustaining coursework to prepare our students for life and career. Dr. Sylvia Romero Johnson will serve as interim chief academic officer. Dr. Romero Johnson joined us earlier this school year as our assistant superintendent for the Office of English Language Learners after an extensive national search. She has a lot of experience in leading curriculum, bilingual education, and team development. Dr. Romero Johnson will oversee the OEL division in this new role and will bring a broad and integrated lens to the role while we conduct a national search for the permanent chief academic officer. Daphne Germain will serve as acting assistant superintendent of the Office of English Language Learners. She has more than 15 years of experience focused on strategic planning and development, project management, and human capital development in BPS. She's currently the Director of English Learner Programs and Implementation in the Office of English Learners, where she has led the team working to launch our Haitian and Vietnamese dual language programs. Corey Harris will move into the role of Chief of Schools that I created. He has supported our school superintendents for several months. He's going to also support our operational leaders and our school leaders, and he has earned the trust and confidence of his colleagues. Corey's work has been very collaborative, and his team is focused and aligned so that school leaders have very clear communication, clear lines of authority to Corey, which has brought about more coherence and streamlined our communications in their work. With Corey's move, Ava Mitchell will take over as Chief of Accountability. Ava has been instrumental in supporting Dr. Granson in the Division of Equity and Strategy, where she's given her strong grasp of the BPS strategic plan and focus on student outcomes. She has a really deep commitment to equity and many years of experience working at the State Department, DESE, to lead school turnaround, innovation, and accountability. She'll lead the accountability team and will help manage the program implementation for our new elementary and secondary school emergency relief, which is known as ESSER funding. And finally, Dr. Regine Filippo, currently Deputy Chief Academic Officer, will move into the role of Interim Deputy Chief of Equity and Strategy, and we'll post that position. Regine has over 20 years of experience in education and is committed to fighting for our most vulnerable students. As a Haitian immigrant who has experienced the oppressive forces of racism, she is a stark advocate for equity has led our EFA program and will be a critical leader in our Office of Opportunity Gaps and Achievement Gaps. I want to highlight some of the wonderful achievements of our incredible staff. It's my favorite part of the report. One of our BPS partners, Mass Insight Education and Research, has named 8 teachers from the Boston Public Schools as the winners of their inaugural Partners in Excellence Program Innovation Award. These awards recognize outstanding contributions to their Science from Home program. The Science from Home program would not have been successful without the significant commitment to their students demonstrated by these 8 dedicated teachers, and we're grateful for their leadership and contributions to this innovative effort in AP Science education. I want to say congratulations to the educators you see pictured on the screen. Darian Capodagli of Edward M. Kennedy Academy for Health Careers, Ivy Rose Likis of Excel High School, Brad Lepak of East Boston High School, Angela Liu of John O'Brien High School of Mathematics and Science, Gabe Matthews of Brighton High School, Matt McCarthy of Madison Park Technical Vocational High School, Barbara Simon of New Mission High School, and Amanda Spence of Charlestown High School. Also, because of their success with improving student participation and achievement, Partners in Excellence in Teaching Awards were also presented in AP Computer Science to Jose Borges of John D. O'Brien School of Math and Science, and AP English to Kalima Rahim of New Mission High School. BPS students continue to thrive because of the commitment of our incredible educators like all of you. Thank you so much. I also want to briefly highlight one other award. Our ABA-based classroom teacher, Georgette Copeland, has been awarded the Conservation Teacher of the Year Award by the Massachusetts Audubon Society. Mrs. Copeland received an award and $1,000 in honor of her teaching excellence and commitment to environmental and conservation education. The Mass Audubon Society awards educators who exemplify both high-quality teaching and creativity in environmental education. I want to say congratulations to Ms. Copeland. Speaking of honoring our educators, we're very excited to relaunch a BPS tradition. Next week, we'll open the nominations period for BPS Educator of the Year 2021. It is a collaboration between BPS, the Boston's Teachers Union, and the City of Boston. The Educator of the Year Awards annually recognize the exemplary educators who go above and beyond to impact the lives of Boston Public School students. Here you can see our 2019 Educator of the Year Award winners. We invite all members of the BPS community, which is teachers, administrators, students, families, and community members and partners, to nominate exceptional educators to honor their work and their dedication to their school communities. Educators can be teachers, paraprofessionals, nurses, librarians, or guidance counselors. Last year, we opened the nominations period for Educator of the Year in February 2020, but we're unable to award winners as all of our work shifted in response to COVID-19 pandemic. This has been an incredibly challenging year for our educators as they completely revamped and reinvented their practice in support of our students. So we're thrilled to be able to bring this tradition back to shine a light on our amazing staff. Last year received over 400 nominations. All educators nominated last year who are currently working in the same role will be considered for the award this year. The nomination period opens Monday, April 12th, and closes Friday, April 30th. So please be sure to show some love and appreciation for your favorite educators. To nominate an educator and for all the details about Educator of the Year, please visit bostonpublicsschools.org/EOY. It'll be available on Monday morning. We'll push out the information in our newsletters, our staff correspondence, social media, and robocalls to families starting this Monday. So please stay tuned. Before I wrap up, I just want to add a few housekeeping items to my report. Please take note that next Wednesday, April 14th, BPS will observe an early release day. Students will be released 2.5 hours earlier than regularly scheduled dismissal time. The majority of our students learn asynchronously on Wednesdays, so most will already be in their homes and not within a school building. This time will be used for educators to begin to prepare their classrooms and prepare for the return of students to 5 days a week in-person learning for Monday, April 26th. Lastly, the BPS school calendar for 2021-2022 has been posted on our website. Please visit bostonpublicsschools.org/calendar to view and download next year's school calendar. Later in the evening, you're going to learn more from my team about our plans for reopening, and we're going to provide an update to you and what that's going to look like. We're excited to have many of our students back in school buildings full time, and the team has been working hard to ensure our school buildings are ready. And in addition to our building readiness, we continue to work closely with the Boston Public Health Commission to monitor our COVID-19 community positivity rate. We have seen a slight increase in the past week, and we'll continue to work with Chief Martinez and our colleagues at the Boston Health Commission to monitor these numbers. Throughout our reopening, we have implemented a number of health and safety protocols, and we will be continuing to take advantage of all of the mitigation measures to ensure the safety of our students, our staff, and our families. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that with the team just a little shortly after my superintendent report. And for that, that's my superintendent report this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent. I don't know if anyone noticed that I was kicked off the Zoom, so I might have to go back and forth, turn off my camera, and my internet is very unstable this evening. So thank you for your report, and I will now open it up to questions from the committee. If you could either raise your hand in your box or write in the chat. Okay, Dr. Rivera, please go ahead.
I don't know if Dr. Coleman was before me, but yeah, so my question is about, thank you, Dr. Cassellius. My question is about the reorganization of the chart. You know, as the co-chair of the English Language Learners Task Force, you know, we were thrilled to have Dr. Romero Johnson with us. So, you know, we're just worried about, you know, when is there going to be a permanent search? I don't know if you could say a little bit about the timeline for a permanent search there for the Office of English Learners, and also with the Chief of Student Support, is that going to be a new position?
Yes, so the Chief of Student Support is a new position in order to coordinate all of the support and recovery to students. So that's going to be an alignment and bring coherence to all of the support around our hub school model, and also to work on attendance and social emotional well-being for our students. As for the EL position, Dr. Romero Johnson is in the Chief Academic Officer position just to get us through our search. And we will be posting that position, and then you know, we're hoping to get somebody in that position by July 1, and then she would go back into her position as the Associate Superintendent for EL. So she's holding it for us.
Is that it, Dr. Rivera?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Dr. Coleman?
Great, thank you. Thank you for following up on our request for the org chart. That's very helpful. I would love, in addition to the org chart, if you could send us the job descriptions of the chiefs and deputy superintendent, so we have a better sense of how all the work flows and who's responsible for what. And if you've articulated particular goals for them already, love to get a sense of what those are, so we can kind of see how the system's kind of working together. That'd be very useful. So thank you for doing that. And these are challenging times, a lot of moving parts, and so glad that we had this concrete representation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's good to know also So Dr. Coleman, we've already posted the deputy position and the CAO position.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Coleman. Mr. D'Arrujo?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. Can I ask if you can elaborate on how these staff changes fit in with the strong return and recovery, in terms of the timing, and then how do all the stakeholders working with BPS know, who the new team is during this, during this recovery time?
Yeah, we'll be introducing the team to all of the different stakeholders. For instance, we'll make sure we introduce to the Equity Roundtable and make sure that our partners are introduced. Now that we've made it public, this way we can make sure that our partners all are aware, especially the ones who are going to be working with our, for instance, our student support position. That will begin on July 1st when Mr. DePina goes into the role. So that's when that will come then. And so we'll do that handshake and introduction.
Right. And the time, this, obviously these are substantial changes. The timing though, it fits in with all the, the sensitive work of getting back to school, into school, April 26th.
Yes.
Elaborate on that.
Yes, so the timing needed to happen now. We're in the budget collab process for all of our central office positions. So they're working on all of their positions and the funding for those. And then getting them in place right now is necessary as we shift so that we could get good candidates in those positions. And because everybody's looking for work if they're going to be moving from district to district right now, we didn't want to lose good candidates. So we wanted to get those positions posted right now. And then we'll be able to have them for July to get going and to have them in place for the fall.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. You may have sent this information to us, but the percentage of staff that have been vaccinated and if what's projected for for April 26th on that.
I don't have that number for you, but I will get it for you. It may be in the slides later when we are reviewing the reopening. So if it's not there, then we'll make sure we get that number for you. I don't have the exact response rate. I know that earlier last week, our response rate wasn't that good on the survey, but we do have some sense of the numbers that have been vaccinated. It's a fairly high percentage of teachers who have been vaccinated. But we see similar types of challenges with vaccinating a larger population throughout the entire district.
Thank you.
Especially staff of color who have chosen not to get vaccinated, or those who have other health reasons why they couldn't get vaccinated.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I wanted to say thank you again for both the congratulations for our Paraprofessionals Day and for all of the staff members who have received recent awards. That's great that people continue to work hard and achieve during all of these crazy times. I have two questions. One, with all of the staff changes, I know we approved the budget last week. Do you foresee of any major changes within the approved budget? I know we still have much more budget work to do as a result of any of these staff changes to date.
No, I don't really see any with our operational budget at this point. I don't think that there's any challenge there.
Okay. And another one was just a quick one. I saw quickly as you flashed the new school calendar, and I noted that on October 11th, it says state holiday. Are we still considering whether we will be able to rename that and call it Indigenous Peoples Day? You know, that is something students and others have come to us a number of years over with.
Yes, so last year we just had it be no school and had it listed on there that way so that we didn't have the controversy with it. It was just, taken off. I think that it's a question for the chair, but I do think, this gives us an opportunity to speak to it maybe in the fall and maybe enlist some of our students again, if they want to bring that forward as a recommendation to the school committee.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Any other questions from members? Okay. I also wanted to congratulate all of the staff who received awards. That was really great. Thank you for, I love the reports with all the pictures. It just brings everything to life. And to be able to see the faces of the educators. So congrats to all of them. I also want to say, I was really excited to attend and meet the secretary. It was a very powerful moment for me as a Latina, being able to see the first Latino Secretary of Education in our history. And then also having Mayor Kim Janey there, you know, with the history of the first Black woman mayor, and then having the superintendent, a Black woman leading our district. It was very moving. So I just want to say it was great. And Miss Gant, the principal, introduced us to one of the staff in the picture, the young woman with the jean dress. I cannot remember her name. I'm so sorry. But she was a student of Miss Gant in middle school, and now she works there. And it was just really cool to hear, you know, their relationship lasted all that time, and you know, she's there teaching and this, and just it was a really wonderful visit, and it was great to have him sit down and hear, you know, from just the staff in the school. It wasn't just the teachers, but also just regular staff. So thank you for that. And lastly, I would just ditto what Dr. Coleman asked is for the job descriptions, and the goals would be super helpful. So thank you for that report. And if there is, oh, Ms. Robinson, you have another question?
No, sorry, I didn't put my hand down.
Okay, no problem. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss. Oh, Vice Chair O'Neill, please go ahead.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak, but since you mentioned it about Secretary Cardonas, I really have to congratulate the superintendent and the district and Chief Martinez from Health and Human Services, who joined me and the superintendent in greeting Secretary Cardona when he toured the vaccination site that we have set up for our educators. He particularly noted he wanted to see it because he felt it's a national model, right? We beat ourselves up a lot that we can always do better in Boston, but we forget sometimes that we're doing some really neat things here that the rest of the country looks at. And what the superintendent did and her team in conjunction with BTU and with Chief Martinez was really a role model that Secretary Cardona wants to emulate and bring to other districts and show how the city working together as a group and getting the resources, and also quite frankly working with the state to actually get the vaccine and to get our staff educated. It was a proud moment for Boston that he specifically wanted to see that. So I congratulate the superintendent and Chief Martinez for working on this together.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I think if we can give an award to Chief Martinez, I think he's the most tired man besides the superintendent, the two of them, everywhere. He's done such amazing work to keep our city safe. So yeah, and I agree with you. I think we always are beating ourselves up. So we should also recognize when we have these moments where others are looking at the work that we're doing and recognize the good work. So thank you, Superintendent, to you and your team. So if there is nothing further, I would like to entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report.
So moved.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, yep. Sorry.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. DeArujo,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes.
The report is approved unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Before we move on to public comment this evening, I would like to invite the superintendent and her team to present a report on operational readiness for the return to 5-day in-person learning on April 26th. So I'll hand it off to the superintendent.
Well, the team, thank you, Madam Chair. The team has been working hard to get us ready for April 26th. There's been a lot to do to quickly adjust and get ready for this expanded learning opportunity to in-person 5 days. And I'm going to turn it over to the team to update you on our operational readiness for April 26th.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, everyone. My name is Monica Hogan, and I lead our Office of Data and Accountability. So we will begin tonight's presentation with an update on choices that families have made as we move to 5 days of in-person learning. On March 15th, families received a form to indicate their preference of 5 days in person or 5 days of remote. The form closed on March 29th with over 40,000 responses, or approximately 80% of our students. For students without a form response, they remained in the model aligned to their current learning model. So students who were currently fully remote remained in a remote model, and hybrid students moved to 5 days of in-person learning. Overall, we see approximately 60% of students will be in an in-person model, with approximately 47% choosing in-person and 12% defaulting into in-person, with 40% of students in a remote model, with approximately 32% choosing remote and 8% defaulting into remote. About 80% of our families who did respond to the form chose the same model that their student was currently in. And the graph on the right shows the differences between grade levels, which is consistent with what we've seen from the fall, where higher percentages of students in our younger grades are choosing an in-person model and higher percentages of students in our older grades are choosing a remote model. Next slide, please. This slide shows the breakdown of remote and in-person choices by major student group. Again, we see similar patterns from the fall, with the largest differences between groups seen by race. Asian students have the highest percentage of choosing fully remote, with 57% of Asian students choosing fully remote, and white students have the highest percentage of choosing in-person learning at 68%. And now I will turn it over to our health services team.
I'm not sure if somebody from our health services team is not on the back end, so maybe we can get this one.
Oh, I am sorry. I was on mute the whole time.
Okay, thanks, Arlene.
All right, I'm sorry. I've been talking away. I'll start again. My apologies. Good evening. My name is Arlene Swan Mahoney. I'm the Assistant Director of Health Services. I'd like to provide you with a brief update this evening for the Boston Public Schools Health Services Department. BPS and Health Services continue our efforts to maintain a safe and healthy environment for students and staff through our weekly surveillance COVID-19 testing. Newly implemented in March 8th is the student pool testing as a layering mitigation strategy to reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission within our schools. We continue to participate in the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education student pool testing program using the Binax Now antigen reflex testing and follow-up testing as needed. Students who have consented to participate in the pool testing programs are tested weekly in school. To date, we have 6,260 consents. These consents have been provided both electronically and in paper format to all of our families in their native language, to include 10 different languages. We continue to plan for ongoing parent and community engagement in an effort to increase participation in student pool testing. We also have a nursing work group in BPS that's in place to review, evaluate, and revise as needed our student pool testing program. So in review, our consents obtained to date, we have 6,260, which is nearly 22%. Our pool testing to date, we've conducted 3,326 tests from March to date today. We've had 33 positive pools. Out of those 33 positive pools, we've had 201 individual students required to have follow-up testing using both Binax Now or PCR testing. And out of those 33 pools, we've identified 23 students who are confirmed to be COVID positive following individual testing that's required. And then we follow up with contact tracing and quarantine protocols. Currently, Health Services has conducted 477 plus contact tracings with identified positive individuals. This does not include contacting all of the presumed and identified individuals who may be a close contact. We continue to contact all in-school staff and students who have confirmed positive results. And this includes contacting all of the close contacts, communicating with our school nurses and our school leaders, and having ongoing daily communication with the Boston Public Health Commission for every positive COVID case. Next slide, please. So this is the dashboard that you have all probably seen before, and this is found on the Boston Public Schools website. We continue to report weekly updates to the public regarding confirmed positive COVID cases for in-person students and staff. So year to date, which is from October 2020 to now, we've had 336 confirmed positive cases for BPS. Out of those 336 cases, 103 are students and 233 are confirmed cases for staff. Next slide, please. This is quite a little busy slide, and what we wanted to do was add the dates of when students have returned over the course of this year to date. With student pool testing in place, asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic students are now being identified, and the increase of in-person attendance can be correlated with the number of confirmed cases. On March 1st, the return of grades K0 to 3 began, and the number of cases slightly increased, as you see on this graph. If you follow the graph over towards the end, around to March 29th, you'll also see an even greater increase. It's important to remember that the increase in attendance for in-person students and staff while we're reviewing all of these numbers. Student pool testing began on March 8th. And with the increase in student consents, we do see an increase of student pool tests, and then obviously increased student positivity rates because of this testing. Other than a brief pilot program in December of 2020, students have not been tested in schools before we began student pool testing. The week of March 18th through the 24th was the first week in which student cases were higher than staff reported cases. And during this week, 5 of the 16 positive students were identified via pool testing. There were 14,271 in-person students during this week, compared to 11,496 in-person students the week prior. The week of 3/25 through 3/31 does mark our highest number of cases to date. Our consented students for pool testing went from 17% in the previous weeks to nearly 22% to date. Out of the 28 positive student cases, 12 of those positive student cases were identified through our pool testing program, which also correlates with an increase in the in-person learners from 14,271 in the previous week to 15,681 last week. Community positive cases are rising, and we urge the BPS community to continue with social distancing, wearing their mask, limiting social gatherings, and following strict COVID protocols. Using the home screening checklist is helpful to identify symptoms, and as a reminder to err on the side of safety. If a student, parent, or other relative is feeling sick or having COVID-like symptoms, it's important to have the student remain at home. Using the screening checklist is a helpful guide, not only for our students and staff who may be feeling sick, but anyone who is around the child as well. We will continue to monitor these trends in school-specific cases. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Costello. I am the Senior Advisor to Dr. Casilius, and it's great to be with you tonight. I'm here to give you a little bit of an update on vaccines for our employees. So we decided back towards the end of January, beginning of February, knowing that K through 12 educators were going to become eligible to receive a vaccine, that we needed to figure out ways to make this easy for our employees. So we had a four-pronged approach where employees could receive a vaccine through existing state clinics. So they could go to any one of the state clinics that are operating. They could go to community-based clinics. So those are local pharmacies or local health centers. And then there were two ways that BPS was going to specifically support our employees. So they could either go to the state and community-based clinics on their own, or they could work with BPS to get a priority slot at some existing clinical partners. And then we, as you've heard about, we have our BPS clinic at the BCYF Center, Galvin Community Center in Mattapan. It was a priority for the superintendent to lift up that clinic. It was a lot of work, and I really do want to thank the Boston Public Health Commission and Chief Martinez and his team. They do incredible work, and we knew we had to be intentional to create a space for our employees to get a vaccine. So the other thing that we did was we created a website, and I want to thank Mark Racine and his team, where all of this information was centralized. I think one of the things that we've seen is, you have to go to a lot of different websites to figure out where you can get an appointment. So Mark and his team built a website that had a place for frequently asked questions. They had a list of every available state clinic and community clinic and our specific clinics, including the priority slots. And then they also, just had other detailed information that would be helpful while employees were considering getting a vaccine. So through the priority slots at existing clinics, we were able to offer about 4,000, just over 4,000 slots. And so that was thanks to, partners at the Reggie Lewis Center, partners at Tufts, partners at a lot of the local community health centers that offered, 125 slots or 250 slots that we were able to post on our website for BPS employees to sign up for. They were dedicated to our employees. And then at the BPS clinic, we offered just over 3,000 shots. And right now that clinic is still operating, and it's doing second doses. And the city of Boston has actually expanded it for all essential workers now. And so they're doing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So they're still doing the second doses for our employees, and they're also vaccinating other city workforce. And, I think the other piece about this, and some members were asking about this, is, we have to reach all of our employees. We have done a survey, that's voluntary for people to respond to. We've received about 1,300 responses. Of that, 97.2% have said that they've either received a vaccine or have at least an appointment to get a vaccine. But we know that that's not the entire workforce. And we know that that's a biased sample because those are the people that are responding to us. So we've been very intentional about doing work to reach employees who might not have access to computers or the internet all day. We had a phone number for employees to call to book an appointment. We also visited our bus yard several times to schedule appointments at the BCYF Center to get a vaccine. And we actually, this past week, this last couple of days, we went to the bus yards with some of the mobile clinics. So really trying to make sure that everybody in our workforce and our contractors, not just our employees. So it's about nearly 13,000 folks that we're trying to ensure have access to vaccines. For our clinic, we do have some data on the number of employees, and it broken down by race. So it's proportional to our workforce. So 54% of our white employees were vaccinated there, 21% Black, 12% Latinx, and 9% Asian. And, we continue to be committed to helping any employee that needs a vaccine with getting a vaccine. So, we have an email where people can email and ask us questions. We have seen that die down quite a bit. People really seem to have either figured it out on their own, or they have taken advantage of one of the priority slots or the clinic at the BCYF. So that's it for vaccines.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Neff Webster, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Operations, and I will be reporting about our facilities work. In regards to windows, there are 27,000 windows in the district. All were audited. The result was that 5,000 windows were in need of cleaning to be operable, and a further 7,000 were in need of repair to be operable. This project started the summer of 2020 and was completed in February of 2021. All air exchange tests are complete, and our communications team is working to publish them onto our public website. In regards to MERV 13 filters, all buildings capable of being upgraded to these filters have had that installation complete. The district has purchased 7,500 units of the Medify 40 air purifiers. These units have been distributed to schools, and there's a system in place for school leaders to request additional units based on space needs. Information regarding this unit can be found on our website, including a video regarding installation.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind just slowing down a little bit? Sorry about that. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, in regards to PPE, we established a coordinated centralized PPE request and delivery process. Each school has a PPE coordinator who requests additional PPE. We have a stockpile on hand of frequently used PPE items to last us through the school year. Deliveries to schools occurs weekly. Installation of indoor air quality sensors in every classroom space will occur over the summer. School leaders have requested tents and cushions for outdoor seating to accommodate 6 feet social distancing during meals, and this procurement is in process. With that, I will turn the presentation over to transportation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Delavan Stanislaus, and I'm the Director of Transportation, BPS. In terms of transportation reopening for April 26th, the transportation team, after the survey closed at the end of March, the team pivoted and started routing students for reopening on the 26th. The team has completed all of our routing so far. All of our students, all of our families who responded to 5-day in-person learning have been routed, and it is scheduled for the 26th. All of our communications have been drafted and is set to roll out. We're communicating our expectation and FAQs to bus eligible students. So we're giving families information on what to expect when riding a bus. We're also sending out bus assignments on April 19th to all of our families. We're still in the process of hiring bus monitors to support some of our work. This is an ongoing process. We've been hiring bus monitors consistently throughout the school year. We're currently working with our union partners, our bus drivers union, on surrounding safety protocols, on adopting the DESE guidelines and how we can best support that work. And because we plan to adopt DESE guidelines for 426, the transportation team, we plan to continue to provide masks and bus cleanings for our buses daily. Next slide. The transportation team has done critical work to improve services for students, and the on-time performance on this slide has reflected that throughout the school year. The work that we've done throughout the school year, it's not, we're not done yet, and we still have a long way to go. Providing safe, on-time, equitable transportation for our students in the city of Boston helps expand and ensure access to quality education for every student who elects service. This is our mission and our task. And our task is not completed until we achieve this goal. I'm going to turn it over to Laura, Food and Nutrition Services.
Thank you, Del. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to the school committee. I'm Laura Benavides, Executive Director of Food and Nutrition Services for Boston Public Schools. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide some updates regarding food and nutrition services and our preparation to welcome our students back to our schools for 5 days a week. Before that, I'd like to share a little bit of some of our accomplishments that we've done during the pandemic. As we know, as our department has worked nonstop for our students and families to continue to provide a much needed service. This pandemic has clearly shown that even the simplest of needs is important. So we were very proud of the opportunity to help families during this time. I always like to share with people that we didn't need a pandemic to tell us how essential we are. So through
Ms. Benavides, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind slowing down a little bit?
Of course, I apologize.
Thank you so much. No problem. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. So through our collaboration within our district, our partners in facilities, transportation, safety services, we work together and have served over 5 million meals and counting under COVID restrictions. Over 1.3 million of those meals were delivered to our students at their homes. Almost 500 BPS food and nutrition services staff have been available at the ready to prepare and serve meals, which resulted in about 3,000 daily hours put towards serving our students in and out of school. Coordinating with our city partners and a partnership with the YMCA and Greater Boston Food Bank provided over 50,000 grocery bags at 22 locations across the city, over 15,000 30-pound grocery boxes to families. In particular, these groceries were delivered to our families receiving the door-to-door meals, as we knew they had limited access to getting groceries. Our PEBT program continues to provide services to our families. As of today, almost 70 million in funds have been distributed to BPS students. For children attending school remotely, the funds are $136 per month, and for children attending hybrid learning, it is $68. Through the stimulus package, this increased by 15% starting in March. So next slide. As we continue to prepare for more students returning to schools, we're working with our school administrators to ensure we create safe eating places for students. This includes locations inside our cafeterias, the classrooms, and outdoor spaces. As Ms. Neff-Webster stated, that we are working with administration through the tents that they're ordering, so we can make sure that we are able to provide that safe distance for children while they're eating. We're also excited to return to our normal meal practices in our kitchens. Our next steps are to increase the number of locations that are cooking from scratch on site, and also the expansion of the newly built cafeteria schools. By May 10th, all schools with kitchens will be cooking for all students on site, and by May 17th, we'll be opening more My Way Cafe kitchens. These are the locations that were constructed over the summer last year. We want to continue our progress in options provided to students. For our 9th through 12th grade students, we will continue to offer meal packs to take home on their last cohort day. For our families that choose remote learning, we will continue to have super sites available. We recognize more students will be in school, so we will be reducing the number of super sites from 32 to 13 key locations that represent the most popular areas where over 72% of participation of families were picking up at these sites. We will also reduce the operating hours from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. to minimize the impact of schools, but also allow for families to pick up meals later in the day. We collaborated with the city of Boston to ensure where locations were closed, we would open a site nearby. They would open a site nearby, so families would not need to walk far to get meals.
Slow down.
Oh, sorry. The reduction in super sites will begin the week of April 26th. Groceries will continue to be available at the super sites weekly. Lastly, I'd like to provide updates on how we will continue to provide services that have a positive impact on our students and community. As we have seen and heard from our current administration, food insecurity is a reality across the country and certainly exists in our community. We're working with our partners in child nutrition on creating structural change in our food systems to confront hunger, strengthen equity, and increase access to meals. Specifically, the USDA announced the expansion of the current meal waivers that will allow us to offer meals at no cost to children under the ages of 18 until September 30th. Parents can continue to pick up meals for their children, which allows the district to continue to offer meals outside of regular breakfast and lunch hours and also offer multiple meal pickups. These options are available until September 30th. We're going to continue to advocate and request for the continuation of the waivers until the end of the 2022 school year and the opportunity to revisit the waivers if we continue to have children that remain on remote learning status. It is our mission to continue to advocate for all of our students and their families for their health and access to meals. And with that is the conclusion of our presentation. I turn it back to the superintendent.
Thank you to the entire team. As you can tell, they've been working around the clock to get ready for our return, and we'd be glad to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cassellius, and thank you to the whole team. So I will start with Ms. Robinson.
Wow, thank you for that report and the amazing work that you all have continued to do throughout the pandemic, but also as we're getting ready to reopen. One question I have, I was concerned when I saw the small percentage of Asian students that are planning to return in person, and was wondering, is that related to the concerns Asian families have about safety, given what's been going on around our country recently?
Well, I don't, I can't speak to each and every family, but certainly we are dismayed by what's happening publicly to our Asian community. And we have condemned that, and we have provided resources to our teachers and statements in support of our Asian community. I can only imagine that some may feel that we do not tolerate any acts of hate or violence in our schools. So I would hope not. We try as best we can to make sure that we have welcoming and accepting and environments for our children.
Great. I know in speaking with the school leader earlier this month, one of the concerns was around families that walk their children to school not feeling safe about walking. And we talked about whether or not putting in place the walking school bus or working with the school safety officers to figure out how to make sure communities that have large numbers of families walking feel safe, particularly in the Chinatown area. So I'm hoping, yeah.
What I would ask is, Monica Hogan, are you on? Because you might know what the rate was prior to these events for the parent survey that we did in the fall. Is it look different than what it is now?
I don't have the exact number in front of me, but this is the same pattern that we were seeing, where our Asian families in the fall were choosing a higher percentage. We're choosing remote learning over hybrid learning. So we can definitely pull up the responses from August, but this is a consistent pattern.
Okay, yeah. I would just urge us to reach out to schools that have large Asian communities to make sure that there isn't something that we're missing in addition. Another question, when we say the windows are operable, in quotation marks, does that mean that they are fully openable or open to whatever the bare minimum of recommendation is?
Means that they're fully operable. They open to their full extent.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And then in terms of facilities, are we removing and replacing furniture that may be the wrong size given what is needed moving forward? I know lots of schools had shared tables, but now can't use those and may need desks, et cetera. Is there a way that that is happening to help schools have adequate, equipment.
Yes, it is. We had school leaders fill out a survey and determine what furniture needed to be moved, whether they wanted it to be moved internal, like somewhere in their school building, or if it needed to be moved off their site and stored centrally. And we're working with each individual school leader that's defined that they need furniture to be moved. And those moves started a week ago, and they'll be moving. We hope to have them done. We will have them done by the 26th for the distancing.
Ms. Robinson, I did want to share that, for decades, we've tried to move away from small desks in rows in terms of, our classroom setup. And so we are trying to avoid as much as possible returning back to rows of desks because we know that that just doesn't make much sense in how we educate our kids today. So we have also purchased cushions and other types of lap desks and things that kids can use while we're in this situation right now.
Yeah, I know. As I've watched on television, it looks like 1960 all over again.
We're
in
trying
many
to avoid
classrooms.
that.
So I can only imagine. I'm hoping at our next time, once schools are open, we'll have more opportunity to talk about what the actual experience is. I know kids are excited to get back physically into school, but what is the program? How much of a quote normal school day are we experiencing, or are we having kids on their devices because the other half of the class is just really wanting to understand what schooling will look like for the rest of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Dr. Rivera?
Yes, I had two questions. The first one is related to that maybe Miss Arlene can answer around the pool testing. Again, I have to say, I know it's because there's more testing that we're identifying more cases, and seeing that increased attendance and increasing cases is disturbing. But that's, so I'm wondering about the pool testing and the consents, and how you mentioned that there's efforts to increase the pool testing consents. And I just wondered if maybe you could give an example of that. As a parent, I haven't received anything that's like a second round reminder or anything like that. So yeah, I'm just curious that's my first question. How are we increasing the pool testing consents?
Sure. So we have just recently met with the Family Engagement Department, and we are planning 3 sessions in the first week of May to have a presentation for all of our families with access to interpreters to show what pool testing is, why do we do it, and breaking it down to make families understand the importance of doing it in terms of getting our students back to school. So that's one thing where those dates will be coming out soon, and we'll be reaching out to families in many different ways to get that word out. We'll also tape one of the sessions, and so it will be available on the BPS website after for families to access. The other way we're doing it is, we mentioned that we have a nurse work group, and the nurses have worked very hard at getting out different ways to message our families. They've done it individually through their schools, but we'd like to have that operationalized throughout the system. And so reviewing different PowerPoints, different handouts, different information. We're talking about including a frequently asked questions for the consents. We can't truly change the consent because it's part of Mass DESE, but breaking down the consent so families can understand what they're actually consenting to.
One other thing too, Dr. Rivera, is that we have included in our family newsletters, and also we're asking our school superintendents to work with school leaders to increase that as well.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to see that even before May, because we're gonna start April 26th. So if there's some kind of video, you mentioned the video is a great idea, getting that out sooner than later. The other question I had, was about when are we going to be able to have after school programs in the facilities? Is that something that we're just not going to deal with right away and just wait until the fall? I'm just curious, what are the planning around having some of the after school programs back in the buildings?
I can answer that.
Yeah.
So we are currently working with our health services and facilities teams. We did a survey of our schools to see, sorry, you hear my little one reading in the background, to do to see how many want to do a before and after school program. One of the things we have to do is assess both the additional cost of cleaning as well as the potential additional staff. So we did a survey this week with our school leaders. The team will be working over the course of this week and next week. Our goal is to be able to have families have some access to before and after school programming when we open or shortly thereafter. We know families will need it to be able to really have the support they need.
May I offer also that there is a video that is already on our website for pool testing, and so I have you look at that. It was for a couple schools that we've done our pool testing for. It's a really wonderful video, and I believe that they also did some additional videos at another school, at the Edison School, that will be ready to share as well.
Yeah, if we could get those, and I hope get them translated too, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mr. D'Araujo.
Thank you. A few questions. How have you resolved the kids eating with the 6-foot requirement while eating?
Food nutrition staff is, thank you for the question, Mr. D'Araujo. Ms. Benavides is working with our school leaders on each school, having a plan in collaboration with our operations team. So that is a mix of classroom, cafeteria, and outdoor. It's been a challenge for some of our schools, to be sure. And so we are continuing to work through a couple of schools that are still having challenges, who have a high percentage of students wanting to come back. But Laura, I'll let you expound on that if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Superintendent, but it's exactly right. We're still in the middle of planning and having conversations with all of our administrators to make sure that they are comfortable with what's going to work. It will be a continuation of what we're currently doing now, which is, well, obviously right now it's either cafeteria service or in the classroom, but because there's a smaller amount of students, it varies. But now that we're having more students every day, it will be a combination of those services, and we are working with them now to determine what they're going to feel comfortable with, as well as, to make sure we have adequate staffing and support, as well as, with tents, we have to have an inclement weather plan to making sure that, again, it doesn't impact students, and that we have just a plan in place to make sure that we continue with meal services.
Just a few more questions. I think you may have touched on this, but just could you elaborate on the protocol if through the pool testing a student does test positive or a staff member tests positive? What is the protocol after that with contact tracing and notification and so forth?
Our team in health services, when we have a student identified through the pool testing who's positive, we then reach back to the school leader, the school nurse, and wherever classroom the student is to look at who may in fact be close contacts. And we go by the definition of CDC within 6 feet for more than a 15-minute period. After we identify those contacts, we review the information with our partner at Boston Public Health Commission. And if agreed upon, we then contact individually all of the close contacts. There's a lot of contacts in there. All of the close contacts and share the quarantine information. Following that, we then reach back to the school leader with a letter for the school community that, without identifying whether it's a student or a staff member, that there has been an exposure within the school. And the letter addresses the mitigation factors that we take into consideration for that.
Okay, thank you on that. And then my final question, I think Ms. Robinson touched on this, is just this with remote learning and kind of this essentially hybrid in the sense of having a live, some cases having a live instructor and having a remote component, and how how each school is going to handle that. And I just heard, with respect to remote learning, I heard, and given I don't hear from everyone, but different folks, some saying that it was effective and their school developed good programming that was for their kids worked well, but for others that was not the case, including either not inconsistent instruction or no instruction. And so how are we approaching this? And then will there be kind of a standard approach across schools to make sure that there's a quality for those that are remote and in person?
So in terms of a standard approach, all the schools have their own approaches to how they do their classroom instruction at the school level. And there's not a standardized approach right now in Boston Public Schools. Schools have their own curriculum. They have their own frameworks for how they're doing their courses. And so there's no one standardized approach to the academic program in Boston Public Schools right now. As for the tools, every teacher has gotten a video monitor with a speaker in order to do the work. They have laptops to be able to do remote learning. They're sharing best practices from school to school. Our school superintendents are helping to share those regionally with the school leaders. So they're getting that professional development. We've had a lot of professional development about how to teach in this type of environment and how to do simultaneous teaching. And you are absolutely right. There is a different level of quality that is not the same at every single school. This would be the same if you weren't in this type of environment, that you have some teachers who use different types of strategies and pedagogies, and they're highly effective, and some other teachers who, are still teaching in the rows, for instance. So there's not that there's not a one standard way, but there is a best sharing of practices across the district.
I think it's good to hear on the best practices piece, because the concerns, at least that were expressed to me, were specific to the medium, to the virtual, and not so much to the way the class was when it was pre-COVID and all in person, but just how even within a school, different uses of the virtual technology, and not just from earlier in the year when everyone's just experimenting, but even in the fall and through today. So but thanks for noting that. So
they have access to similar tools like Seesaw and Zoom. In the classroom, we have learning management software where they can share their best practices. So they do have those tools in order to do that. And there shouldn't be any students getting no instruction. There is a requirement that students have a full day of instruction, whether it's remote or whether it's in person.
Yeah, there was a case that was raised to us on that. But
please let me know if there's something happening like that so we can address it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair O'Neill.
Madam Chair, and just a couple of quick points with the question. First, I want to echo the point Ms. Robinson raised about concern over the numbers with our students and families who are a member of the AAPI community. And that was a bit surprising to see the percent that want to stay remote. And I appreciate Ms. Robinson raising that. And I want to echo her comments of it may make sense for the district to dig a bit deeper on that, to really make sure there are safety concerns of families and students and what we can do to help on that. I was also struck by the numbers in particular among our high schoolers. You really saw as kind of a sideways bell curve, right? And then it was, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and particularly 12th. Now, part of it was folks who didn't respond. They were very large percentages didn't respond, and therefore were defaulted into what they had picked before. But between the did not respond or chose remote, it was a little bit of a surprise to me. And, Superintendent, I'm just not sure your thoughts on making sure our high school students in particular are engaged. But, I was a little bit surprised, mostly by high school seniors, thinking that they really wanted to get back into the classroom for their final year in the school. So I'm not sure your thoughts on that, Superintendent.
Well, I think, yeah, that's a really good question, Mr. O'Neill. It's been so frustrating for our high school students all year because school just doesn't feel like school. We've been cohorting them so they're in the same group, so they don't go from class to class to class to class. That hasn't felt normal to them. Some of our schools have had what's called a call center model where they go and they get the social emotional supports, but maybe they're taking their classes still on Zoom. And so that has been a challenge for some students who are like, well, I'm not just going to go up there and get out of bed to go and be on the computer when I can do that from my room. And then I think the social emotional challenges that our students have had to their mental health has been real. We have had challenges with having students attend, not just in person, but attend remotely too. It's been a challenge for our high school students. We were at the Tynan and the secretary was asking, how are the children? And the Tynan staff was saying, oh, they're doing good. They're doing well. But they're the younger ones, this intermediate grade age group. But the high school ones, the high school students have struggled. They really have.
Yeah, I hope that, we're on heightened alert to the social emotional needs of our students as they return to 5 days, right? We've all kind of lost the social skills of interacting with a bunch of people all day long. And, I hope we're going to be on heightened alert to that. This is obviously, the chair and I and other members have been involved in conversations with PSAC, and, they have been continuously raising that issue of concerns over the social emotional toll that this has taken on our students and the mental health toll it has taken on them. So hopefully we're on really heightened awareness of that, particularly as students.
Yeah.
Get back to 5 days a week with fairly full classrooms.
Yeah, and this is why I've pushed back so strongly on the MCAS and delivering the MCAS, because you don't want kids to come back and then they have to test
and
on
yes,
MCAS, and then they have to test on the advanced placement, and then they have to test for SAT, and then if you're an EL learner, you have your access test, and you have your advanced placement test and your IB test, and it's just like these students are, what am I coming back for, just to do testing? And so there's just all these other tests that people forget, that there's the SAT makeup, there's the ACT, there's the advanced placement test, the IB test, the MCAS test, it's just a lot.
Yep, great point. The last point I wanted to make was a little bit of what Mr. DiArujo was saying as well. When I visited some schools, I've really seen the two models, one where the teachers are teaching to the students in front of them, but also have the camera there and the widescreen TV, and it's great to see that in use. And sometimes it's very seamless with the students at home, sometimes not. But I've also seen some of the schools where the school leader has decided, no, we're not doing that at all, and have completely separate schedules. So, students rotate where they're in person, it's only in person, or where they are remote, it is only remote. And I'm wondering, Superintendent, how is that a school by school decision? You were just saying that, we don't have a central approach to it. And what should parents expect? How should parents know how their child is going to be taught once we move to the 5-day in-class model?
So, hopefully it'll look much like it did prior to when we closed down, other than some improvements, right? Everybody be one-to-one with technology now. Hopefully we learned from this past year around.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Superintendent. I just want to clarify my question to help it. It will be different because we're going to have roughly a third or more of our students who have chosen remote.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to, how will parents know, well, my child going to be in a synchronous model, or is it going to be, if they're remote, they're just remote, et cetera. That's
so you're talking, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about the fall when we go back.
I'm talking about, starting April.
Yeah, so just to clarify, in the fall, we're looking to be completely in person.
Absolutely.
So, and even this summer, completely in person. So not doing hybrid and simultaneous at all. But right now we will have to still have simultaneous because so many of our students are choosing to still be remote. And so they will be teaching students in the cloud, and they'll also be teaching students in person. There are some schools that have figured this out with co-teaching models. It's easier to do when you have multiple classrooms of the same grade, because you can do the way that you schedule your students. Like if you have 2 classrooms of 3rd grade, you can have one teacher teaching in person, one teacher teaching the kids remote, and they compare. And so there's a number of schools that are doing that as well. And I think that's where we get to Mr. De Araujo's point of, some schools have been able to do it and other schools haven't been able to do it because they just have 1 3rd grade teacher, for instance.
Actually, yeah, that's a great point, that the more strands there are in a school, that's really the flexibility. But
That's
parents can find out by talking with their school. This is a school by school decision, right?
That's right. Yes,
Parent-
always, you'll hear of this answer from me all the time. If you want good information, get it from your teacher and get it from your principals. This is especially true in Boston, where we have so much autonomy, and schools, do choose these curricular decisions themselves.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair O'Neill. If there's any, Dr. Rivera, do you have another question? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for allowing me another question. I did have, now that this came up with the summer, this comment about summer learning. Because I remember Assistant Superintendent Zayas mentioning that that summer learning, that there were still some requests for it to be also remote, at least through the 5th quarter programs. I know some of them plan to also be remote, and there's a desire for that. So the question is, is that going to be allowed, that some of the summer programming continue to be remote? And also a question about the school safety measures in the summer programming too. If there's school partners offering in person, how is the school district going to ensure that their safety protocols are being addressed off campus, so to say, off the school sites?
Really good questions, Dr. Rivera. So let me clarify. There will be other remote opportunities, but to get at what Mr. O'Neill was saying, they won't be simultaneous. So if we craft a schedule for a remote class or a remote opportunity, parents would know that that's a remote opportunity, and then you wouldn't be expecting teachers to do both at the same time. For health and safety, we're working with our Boston After School and Beyond partners, as well as our Boston Public Schools school buildings, and they'll have the same safety requirements. You'll have to mask, you'll have to be 3 feet apart. Unless there's some sort of change in CDC guidance, we will be following the DESE and CDC guidance and the guidance that we've put out.
Okay. Excuse me. Any questions from anyone else? Okay. I want to thank all of the presenters tonight. I think we saw in the presentation some innovations that have been happening, and just want to thank not just the presenters, but again, all the staff who have been doing double duty and doing additional things beyond the scope of their normal job, which has not been a normal year. So I just want to say thank you. And my 2 questions were stolen. The after school, so I'm glad you asked that, Dr. Rivera. And then Vice Chair O'Neill, his comments around the high school students, which is very worrisome to me. I predominantly work with middle and high school students and have really been able to see the social isolation, the effects, particularly for some of our most vulnerable families in terms of COVID rates and unemployment and all of that. So as we look forward to talking about the ESSER monies, I definitely want to learn a little bit more about how we're going to really help our high school students, with all the trauma they've had this year and the post-traumatic stress that, everybody, but particularly I think that population. We all have, as older adults, we all have our circle, our network of friends and longtime friends. In high school, you can still have those friends, of course, but it's very different. So I just want to ditto what Vice Chair O'Neill has said, but thank you again. And now I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Sullivan for general public comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. We have 16 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. Those who require interpretation services will receive an additional 2 minutes. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Large groups addressing the same topic are encouraged to consolidate their remarks or choose a spokesperson to provide testimony. Written testimony is appreciated and encouraged. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. Thank you for your cooperation. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. Also, please make sure that you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment, and that will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. We'll begin this evening with Mike Heischman, and he'll be followed by Jennifer Rosewood.
Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 3 minutes. Oh, good. Mike Heischman, Dorchester, Boston Education Justice Alliance. I'm grateful to share that the comments of the chair at the start of the meeting messed up my prepared statement. At your last meeting, the school committee unanimously voted in favor of the budget. Somebody and something was missing. Kimani James' voice was not present because he had angrily resigned from the school committee because of your disrespect of student voices. The budget is your most important annual vote, and no official student voice participated in the decision. Many members besides Kimani have resigned from BSAC, and those who have stayed have major issues with the school department. Would you please give a report on the progress of your negotiations with BSAC? I'm very pleased that a BSAC rep will soon be rejoining the school committee. You have been investigating what had happened with the students with BSAC and Youth on Board. You are complicit in what had happened. The community needs an independent investigation. 2 examples of your disregard for student voices. BSAC students have repeatedly asked you to pass a resolution in support of their representatives becoming a voting member of the school committee with a stipend. BSAC students have asked you to pass a resolution calling on DESE to postpone MCAS this year. Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair, for your strong actions. I still don't understand why the school committee can't pass a resolution. I agree with Dr. Casilius. MCAS is a poor evaluation system and it is racist. Please inform parents and students that they have a right to opt out of the MCAS test this year without any penalty. You must stop manipulating and controlling student voices. BSAC should become student-led, and the adults who work with them should support their leadership. By the way, public comments began tonight at 6:32 p.m. I think we have to be talking about the school committee abolishing the filibuster. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jennifer Rose Wood. She'll be followed by Mike Siskolka and Sarah Noriega. If you can please raise your hands in Zoom. Jennifer?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Chair, Ms. Oliver Davila, and Vice Chair, Mr. O'Neill, for your advocacy to Commissioner Riley and Secretary of Education Cardona on the push to suspend MCAS. And thank you, Dr. Cassellius, for your prioritizing of students' social and emotional wellness during the pandemic and your recent words to this body calling out the racism of the MCAS test. I urge the members of the school committee to go further than suspending the test and join the statewide movement to place a multi-year moratorium on MCAS. My name is Jen Rosewood and I live in Roxbury. I'm a veteran teacher, a BPS parent, and a BPS employee. From my 20-year career as an ELA teacher and my current vantage point in the classroom as a specialist working with BPS's most vulnerable populations, students on IEPs and English language learners, I can assure you that MCAS has only widened educational inequity, not remediated it. This test has only been good for showing what is already well known, that students in well-funded, high-wealth districts possess unfair advantages over students in underfunded, high-poverty districts due to profound economic, linguistic, and racial injustice. The test shows nothing about the accomplishments of our students in Boston Public or the quality of our teachers. Having worked in both Boston and in one of Massachusetts' wealthy suburbs, I can tell you the root problem facing BPS is a rigged economic system that denies our students and their families good jobs, safe neighborhoods, and well-resourced schools. No test will solve that. What I ask of you tonight is to exercise your considerable political will to stop punishing students, schools, and teachers for economic problems that we did not create and cannot solve, and instead advocate for sustained major investment in Boston's immigrant communities and communities of color. Stop spending $32 million a year for a test which is done and will continue to do nothing to improve our students' educational outcomes, but instead has had many destructive impacts, including closed schools, a major drop in applicants to teacher education programs, loss of creativity and joy in the learning process, and a drastically narrowed curriculum with a significant quantifiable loss of content knowledge in subjects like science and history. Most egregious, yep, I see, just 20 seconds. Most egregious of all, being denied a diploma due to MCAS has been shown to increase the school to prison pipeline, which inestimably and disproportionately harms our Black and Brown students. I urge you tonight as a mother and a teacher to be the change and stand up for lasting justice and change in Boston Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mike Sizolka, followed by Sarah Noriega and Abobami Ducanto.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Great. Hey, so hi, everybody. My name is Mike Skolka, and I live in Dorchester. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. So this past January, the College Board announced that they were eliminating the SAT subject tests and the optional essay section. And more colleges than ever before have declared standardized testing as optional for admission. I bring this up, this is not an isolated situation. What it is a necessary movement away from standardized testing. Across the country, we are seeing this process play out, and it's not just because of the pandemic. People are waking up to the fact that these massive tests, such as the MCAS, only illustrate and preserve the deepest social, economic, and racial divides in our society. Educators often don't see much value in MCAS results, and that's because the test doesn't serve the interests of education. It merely serves corporate interests, and the only reason it still exists is because the movement away from big testing is still growing. as the movement for more learning and less testing continues to grow, the MCAS will go away along with the rest of big testing. So I love the way the meeting started. I appreciate that we all want to cancel the MCAS, at least for now, right? Baby steps. You got to start somewhere. It's a great step. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, school committee members. But a school committee member said it earlier in the meeting. We in Boston do great work, and the rest of the nation does look to us for leadership. And for that reason, especially, I also urge you to be proactive in advocating for an end to big testing in general. Let's work towards canceling the MCAS forever. Our city and our students deserve that. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Noriega.
Hello, my name is Sarah Noriega. I'm a current teacher in Mattapan. I've worked in these marginalized communities for over 10 years. I'm gonna keep mine short and sweet because I think everybody hit the main key topics. First, I would like to say thank you for allowing us to speak. Also pointing out that thank you, Superintendent, for bringing to light a huge need for our students when they return within their social emotional needs. Unfortunately, I personally am a survivor of familial suicide, which has led to being a huge mental health advocate. And this is an issue that is still stigmatized within all communities, and more importantly, within these marginalized communities. So thank you for taking that time to really bring that to light and these social emotional needs that these students need to be addressed. Also, I think when we have these conversations, people see it as teachers not believing that students need to be assessed and see where they are. Obviously they do, because how can we know where they are and how to get them to where they need to be? That being said, these standardized tests take up significant amount of instructional time, especially so the school that I work in is completely marginalized. The information being provided is nothing that is new. You're having students that are already significantly behind, and losing time to run these tests that are just providing the same information over and over and over again is, for me, not an efficient use of our time as educators. I'm not saying, burn down the bridges and we all, have anarchy. No, but I do commend also the collaboration that's happening within the pandemic and people really banding together and trying to create change. To also piggyback off the last speaker, I definitely also agree, as Boston, as a city, we are leaders in educational reform. And I think about myself, I work within these communities because I am that demographic and have seen and have experienced that inequity. And within this city, we not only need to think about creating change here, but also setting the tone for nationwide change. So that is where I say, thank you for doing all that you do. And we need to continue to push to do more so that we can make change across the board.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Abubami Ducanto, followed by Nicole Elliott, John Mudd, and Daniela Petuchowski. If you can please raise your hands virtually in Zoom.
Hi, could you guys hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Hi, I'm Abubami Ducanto. I live in Dorchester. Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chairman, for letting us speak tonight. I'm affiliated with School Facts Boston. I'm on the Family Advisory Board, and I believe that schools systems are stronger when students and families' voices are heard and they're part of the decision making that's happening at schools and within school systems. And one major concern I have from working with students currently is once they get back in school, yes, it's important to catch them up academically. Like a lot of people said, it's also important to give them social emotional support. Some of them have experienced extreme trauma. Some just going back to school right away, which is the fear of COVID, that's going to play a role in it. So really putting that at front and center for our students. And my ask for you guys is that while you guys are coming up with a plan, improving the plan, making sure that families and students' voices are heard and they're part of the decision-making of the plans, because it's important to hear their voices and what their needs are instead of just having someone else make the decision of their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nicole Elliott.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Elliott, and I'm an elementary sheltered English immersion teacher in Roxbury. I'm speaking tonight to urge you to pass a resolution calling on the DESE Commissioner to cancel MCAS both for this year and into the future. I would like to thank the superintendent, the chair, and the vice chair for their comments and their advocacy on behalf of our students. I wanted to touch on a few points regarding standardized testing. First, just about the data. We hear a lot of arguments that we need MCAS to tell us how much learning loss there is, but this isn't what MCAS is designed to do. It's designed to see if students are meeting those standard benchmarks. It's not like a test like the MAP growth assessment, which is going to measure progress and show us where students are following along a learning continuum. And also this data that we're going to get from the MCAS, it's not immediate. We're not going to get this in time for it to have any meaningful impact on instruction come the fall. Second, I'd like to speak personally about my students. So my students are English language learners, and I see the effect that these standardized tests have on them. I see my students in tears because they're sitting in front of tests that are in English. I constantly encourage them to not worry, to try their hardest. They know my motto by heart, do your best and don't stress. But the reality is that they're going to stress. The reality is they want to succeed, they want to be successful, but these tests, and we are not putting them in a position where they are demonstrating their success, where they're demonstrating what they can do and what they know. I see my students every day. I see what they know. I see what they can do and how much growth that they have made, and these test scores don't measure this. As an example, my students have taken 2 ELA interim exams. If you just look at the data, you will see that on the open response, both times they scored zeros. What you don't see is the difference in their responses. You don't see that the first time, only 50% of my students attempted to answer it. 100% attempted to answer that open response the second time. You don't see that only 27% the first time answered in English, but 100% answered in English on the second interim. You don't see that on the first one, only 18% of responses were relevant, but that number jumped to 56% the second time. Those 2 zero scores don't tell the full story of the growth that my students have made and the success that they have had this year. MCAS is not the full story. It doesn't show what my students can do. It doesn't show how they have grown. It does not affirm or celebrate my students. So please think about my students sitting in their chairs with tears running down their faces. Please think about our students all across the city. Please take action to end MCAS. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Mudd.
There, I should know how to unmute by this time. My name is John Mudd. I'm a longtime Boston Public Schools advocate. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Good evening. I deeply appreciate that the chair and the committee have delayed the vote on the proposed goals and values plan. Many of us desperately want to join with you in rallying around some targeted goals for improving the education of all students in Boston. The proposed document did not do that. With this delay, we now have the opportunity to jointly develop goals and measures that can engage our energies in working together. That is our challenge in the next 3 weeks or however long it takes. I've submitted tonight to the committee essentially 2 testimonies and this introduction. The first outlines problems that many of us had with the original document. I would hope that all members could read it so that each of you hear the kinds of concerns that were expressed in the meetings that some members of the committee had with the various task forces and stakeholder groups. The second is a preliminary list of key issues identified in the document submitted to the committee by those groups, including the ELL Task Force, the SPED PAC, the Boston Network for Black Student Achievement and BEAM, and the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force. The committee needs to create a process where there can be an open discussion of how to resolve these issues by changes not just in the language of preambles or values, but by changes in targeted goals and measures. In the testimony on goals and values in the next page, there's some overarching concerns I want to highlight. You've heard me many times say that the narrow goals set by the committee mark a retreat from the inspiring vision that is included as the #1 priority, the elimination of opportunity and achievement gaps at a high level, and the goal that students should experience in their classes a diversity of teachers that match their own diversity. You may say you are keeping these commitments, but the goals you say you will focus on do not do this. I would say there's another huge concern, and that is the fear of dumping ELL and special education students into regular education without supports. Perhaps I'm reading too much into this, but the goals of just focusing on English or English language arts, the plans that some of us have seen from the different departments, all when they're combined, feed the fears of many of us that the new goals will mean pushing ELL and students with disabilities out of specialized programs and into regular education. Finally, in the last page, I listed a number of issues that I think need attention. I'm not going to list those here. They talk about access to native language for ELLs. You need to deal with English learners with disabilities and so forth. It would help us to know what process you would have to establish so that we can participate jointly with you. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Mr. Mudd. Our next speaker is Daniela Pachowski. She'll be followed by Roberto Jimenez, Ruby Reyes, and Sharon Hinton. If you can all please raise your hands virtually. Daniela?
Hi, I'm Daniela Pedakowski. I'm a 6-year teacher at the Della McKay School in East Boston. I'm really grateful and relieved, as many others have said, to hear from school committee chair that the school committee is supporting the superintendent and countless educators, students, and families in calling for the cancellation of MCAS this year. I want to tell you why, from my view as a teacher, and I think I echo many things that Nicole shared, it's important that we cancel MCAS this year and that we push to overhaul yearly standardized testing in the future. I'll just tell you about one of my students. I'll call him Bob. He's like a wind-up toy. He's either sleeping or humming while he struggles to stay in his seat. And like so many of the young humans in our care in Boston, this pandemic wasn't the first time in his 11 years that he's faced hardship. He came to this country at 8 years old, was detained at the border, separated from his mother and his sister for much of the time. And today, he and his 7th grade sister, even though they have separate rooms, they often decide to sleep in the same bed to be sure that they will not be separated again. During this pandemic, Bob and his family have had to move twice. Their mom has been in and out of work. He and his sister now walk over a mile to and from school every day, although I hope that I'll soon see them on their bicycles. I love having Bob in my class. He's funny and sharp. He calls out BS when he sees it. Why this? Why that? When he came to our school in 3rd grade, he was identified as a SLIFE student, had no familiarity with numbers or letters. And now 2 years and a pandemic later, he's discussing fractions with the rest of the class. And though he'll groan at me about it, he'll sit and read along to a recording of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and gasp, "He's a kidnapper," when he finds out that Mr. Tumnus's promise to the White Witch. Today, during our remote day, I saw him sharing his screen to his small literature circle group as he wrote out his ideas for why Mr. Tumnus was crying during the chapter. MCAS will never show how Bob or most of our students contribute to the intellectual communities of our classrooms. It will never show the incredible learners they are, nor will it ever show the dedication of their educators to their growth as learners. And it's so painful as a teacher to sit down with our students, all with their own stories, and waste their precious learning time with days of testing that make them feel stupid and powerless and bored. And as you know, annually, our students are encouraged to do their best and take all day on these tests.
20 seconds.
Last summer, I worked in the BPS summer program. It's a 6-week program, and we had standardized testing that I'm sure was expensive to us. to give during the first week and the last week. And one horrible example of our reliance on testing is that I was contacted a week in by a colleague that his second grader had accidentally taken one of my seventh graders' tests because of the number that she'd been given. She'd spent 3 days testing as a pre-programmed test. What to do about it? When we asked, we were told that she should test again. So I think that's an example of how we waste student time with testing. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Roberto Jimenez.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Roberto Jimenez. I live in Chelsea. I'm the political organizer with the Boston Teachers Union, and I'm also an elected member of the Chelsea School Committee. I want to thank Dr. Cassellius for her recent comments against the use of MCAS and other standardized tests, and I want to thank the chairwoman for supporting that position and for standing against this form of systemic racism. I believe that it would still be helpful for the movement against MCAS, for the school committee to pass a resolution against its use this academic year. And further, I want to highlight the recent measure that New York City schools have taken to turn testing into an opt-in process. If that is something that can be done, it would probably be the best way for us to move forward with reducing the harm of this test this year, and potentially something that can be done without needing a federal waiver. Before I worked for the BTU, I spent almost a decade working in college admissions at the University of Michigan, at Harvard, and at Tufts. It was doing that work that I first learned about the disparate impact of standardized testing on students, especially students of color, as I would have to sit through reading applications from amazing students of color who would then not be admitted because their SAT scores were low. On the other hand, sometimes we would admit some of them, and years later, we would see how they thrived in college. Then I learned about the correlation that these tests have with family income and parent educational attainment, and I realized that these tests are just a tool to continue telling kids of color and low-income kids that they're not good enough, further perpetuating low expectations for them. The students who do poorly in these tests, whether it's the SAT or the MCAS, they can thrive if we give them the resources to do so, regardless of their test score. And that's because the tests don't measure what people think they measure. I don't believe MCAS makes sense any year, but this year in particular, it is especially cruel that DESE expects us to bring back students into classrooms to then prepare them to take this test and then administer it. Let's focus instead on supporting our kids through the trauma that they lived through this year, or getting them engaged with academic content in ways that are only possible now that they're in person. If we only have a limited amount of instructional time left, let's spend it on the things that are actually valuable to students. As a fellow school committee member, I'd push for a resolution in Chelsea that calls for canceling MCAS and for the legislature to reimagine how we do assessments and accountability in a way that is student-centered and not reliant on standardized testing. I hope Boston would support this as well, and I'd be happy to provide any help in crafting a resolution if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ruby Reyes.
Thank you. My name is Ruby Reyes, and I'm the director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance and a Dorchester resident. At the last school committee, a school budget was passed absent of student voice. The voice of BSAC students and their work has been stifled by adult leadership working to reshape their experiences rather than embracing their unique perspectives. The absence of this perspective is purely at the fault of poor adult leadership. Will the internal BPS investigation be looking into the adults who told students not to say things that they should have? The shameful act is a historical pattern of poor leadership and a continued practice of not listening to students, parents, or educators. Families continue to experience the gaslighting behavior that BSAC students have spoken out against through their school budget process, through the gray haze of Build BPS, wondering if their school will close without warning, and now through struggling with compensatory and additional support services that they should be offered through the additional federal funding. Families should not have to ask for these services. They should be offered additional services, especially with summer quickly approaching. These funds should not be used to make up for school budget loss or given out with stinginess. This goes hand in hand with the need to push for the cancellation of MCAS. Thank you, Dr. Cassellius, for providing feedback to Commissioner Riley to recommend canceling the MCAS. Beja agrees that MCAS is racist and stands behind a boycott of the MCAS. Beja asks that you back your statements and feedback with action. We ask that this school committee join the over 35 other school committees across the state who have signed resolutions to recommend canceling the MCAS. Signing a resolution draws an important line on the sand. Will you be on the side with students and families? In addition, we ask that you communicate to BPS families that they can opt out of taking the MCAS. Most families do not realize that even before the pandemic, this has always been an option, and they can write a one-sentence letter to their school leader saying that they are choosing to opt out of MCAS. In addition to the MCAS, we don't need additional graduation requirements like the Mass Core without additional resources. School budgets need to ensure that students have what they need to meet graduation requirements rather than more lip service or creative excuses for why schools are missing basic necessities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sharon Hinton, and she'll be followed by Vanessa Morales, Sasia Doman, and Heidi Winston. If you can please raise your hands in Zoom. Sharon?
Good evening, school committee members and Superintendent Cassellius. I'm Sharon Hinton, mother, parent of a BPS and University of Maine graduate who is now a graduate student at Northeastern University. I'm also an educator and Doctor of Education candidate at Northeastern University, community advocate and president of Black Teachers Matter Incorporated, and homeowner in Hyde Park. I come before you this evening thanking you for your continued efforts to reopen the BPS schools while addressing the pandemic and canceling the MCAS exam. My concerns this evening are several, some old and some new. Number one, I've asked this question several times before and will ask it again tonight. While I'm happy to hear that April 28th, BSAC will appoint the student rep, will that rep receive a vote and compensation? If not, is the Boston School Committee going to move forward to make that happen? At one point, I received a response that it is not legal to compensate the student rep at this time. I want to remind the committee that at one point in time, slavery was also legal, and working without pay is akin to slavery, and laws can also change. Again, I encourage the Boston School Committee, Boston City Council, and Mayor Janey to make those changes, and if not, why not? Number two, how can information regarding the continuing exam school proceedings and lawsuit be made more available for the average parent, student, and community member? I'm very engaged in this process for various reasons, and as much as I try to stay current, keeping up with all the meetings and information, it can be daunting. I encourage the superintendent and Boston School Committee to hold a few community listening sessions to keep parents and students informed and engaged regarding this process. Question three, there is a reported $460 million coming to the Boston Public Schools. I join others in asking the questions, how is this money going to be spent? Who will decide how the money is to be allocated? Who in the community will be involved in this decision-making while decisions are being made and not after? Will this process be open to the public? How and when? Finally, my nonprofit organization, Black Teachers Matter Incorporated, is a 501c3 actively engaged in providing professional development, instruction, educational resources, and academic recovery support and academic services using an equity lens and culturally competent and socially conscious and responsible teachers and curriculums. And we would like to join with the superintendent, school committee, Mayor Janey, and other stakeholders as a community asset and partner towards this effort. We remain your partners in achieving education equity for all. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Vanessa Morales.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. In Dorchester. I serve on School Facts Boston. I first want to say thank you. I echo others and their voice about not having the MCAS for the school year. I believe it's important that we make sure that we don't add any more undue stress on our children coming into the school this school year. My concern is more about the social emotional about our children coming into this school year and going into the next school year for the fall. I think it's important that our social emotional be addressed for our students when returning to school, especially as we reference towards our high schoolers that are not engaged. I think it's important for us to have a plan to engage and re-engage our students for graduation to college and beyond so they can get out. Thank you. And I'm with School Facts Boston. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sasia Doman, who will be followed by Heidi Winston.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, school committee and Superintendent Casilius. My name is Sasia Doman. I'm a paraprofessional at the McKinley Southern Academy and have worked in the district for almost 3 years. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to each of you and to the greater community. This current school year of 2020-2021 is one that our school committee will never forget. We witnessed not only changes in the leadership of our country, but we have and continue to be impacted by COVID-19 and its trail of devastation, along with alterations in the lives of all students, families, and educators as it pertains to learning. Albert Einstein reminds us that education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. Schools are an essential foundation for learning, and as a result of COVID-19, the norm of learning has and will be forever altered. Students and families and educators were tasked with the responsibility of shifting their learning abruptly, with or without consent. Families were forced to advocate and weigh obligations involving their students, their job, and expectations of the district. Virtual learning, although distant, although lacking of a true sense of in-person community and care, although unable to provide in-person teaching, although often creating distance between the learner and the educator, virtual learning offered safety. Virtual learning offered a sense of ease and lessened the fear of transmitting and or testing positive for COVID-19. I too missed a sense of community, in-person support, and the ability to foster relationships in person. However, I do not miss being sick. I do not miss laying still wondering if today will be my last breath. I say this to emphasize the importance of safety. Students and staff are expected to return in person 5 days on April 26th. However, the week prior, April vacation offers a week of risks, uncertainty, and safety protocol being followed, and further increases the fear, level of uncertainty, and possible transmission of COVID-19. School committee, superintendent, please assess safety protocols being implemented in schools. More work still remains to be done in terms of creating safe environments for students and staff to return to, especially since being vaccinated does not guarantee immunity. Please reconsider reopening full-time 5 days on the 26th and given an extra 2 weeks following April vacation for quarantine to hopefully lessen the risks of endangering students, staff, and families. As I shared before, education is vital to teaching the minds of the students to think. However, safety will give those minds the opportunity to think versus shut down due to fear of infection. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, our final speaker is Heidi Winston, but there is no one by that name signed into this meeting. So that concludes our speakers for general public comments.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, and thank you to those of you who spoke to us this evening and shared your perspective. Your testimony is very, very important to us. Our first action item this evening is a grant for approval in the amount of $34,425. And I will now open it up to the committee for any questions or comments. Okay. Thank you. So if there are no questions, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the grant as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. I heard a second, but I don't know who was.
It's me, Harden.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Coleman. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Mr. DeAraujo,
Yes.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes.
The grant is approved unanimously.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Sullivan. The committee is not going to be taking a vote this evening on the superintendent's policy recommendation regarding the requirements for graduation from the Boston Public Schools. And the committee is going to revisit this proposal at a future meeting. Additionally, the committee is not going to take a vote on the goals and guardrails values this evening. Instead, we're going to just take a little bit more time to reflect on the feedback that we've received from several stakeholders. And we also want to thank the ELL and the OAG task forces, SPEDPAC, Beja, Beam, MAC, BTU, and the Boston Network for Black Student Achievement and others who attended our 7 community sessions and shared their thoughtful input to the committee and for pushing our thinking. The committee really wants this document to be a community document that brings us closer to our shared goals of improving student outcomes. So we look forward to taking a vote on the goals and guardrails at our April 28th meeting. Our first report this evening is interim salary and non-personnel payments on external funds. The superintendent brings this request to the school committee annually, seeking approval for the interim salary payment order for personnel paid with external funds. This funding would come from grants projected to be awarded in fiscal year 22 for approval at a future school committee meeting. And at this time, I would like to invite David Bloom, who is the Deputy Chief Finance Officer, to please present this report.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. And thank you to our committee chair, who I think did a wonderful job of presenting most of the facts of the report already. The basic premise here is that there are some of our grants, especially federal grants, that will not come before the committee until after the start of the work period for some of the employees who are paid on those grants. We have every expectation based on our projections and conversations with the Council of Great City Schools to receive those funds. And so we would ask for your approval to begin payment for those employees when this fiscal year changes, even if we have not yet gotten the award. We will then sort of make it official once we bring the award to you, usually in September.
Great, thank you so much. Superintendent, did you want to say anything? No, okay. Thank you so much, Deputy Chief Bloom, and the committee looks forward to taking action on this request at our next meeting. Thank you. So our final report this evening is the revised attendance policy and procedures starting in school year 21-22. And at this time, I'd like to invite Brian Marks, Senior Director of Opportunity Youth, to please present this report.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the members of the school committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present our vision for our revised attendance policy going into school year 21-22. So our attendance policy is fundamental to ensuring equity in how we support, motivate, and engage our most vulnerable students to fully participate and benefit in their education. Historically, the district attendance policy has relied on the threat of punishment to dissuade poor attendance. However, contemporary research shows that punishment is not an effective response to poor attendance. Reducing chronic absenteeism requires problem solving and support, not blame and punishment. However, elements of punishment remain embedded in the district's attendance policy. So throughout over a 2-year period, we, with the support of our district attendance advisory committee, we use the racial equity planning to engage a wide range of stakeholder feedback. And some of the key rationale in terms of the revisions to the attendance policy are outlined here. To make the policy easier for students, families, and staff across the district to navigate. We've consolidated 3 superintendent circulars to 1. We've updated the strategies and best practices to focus on chronic absenteeism. We're proposing to end the policy of converting student tardies to absences, which is not reflected in the guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, nor is it reflected in Massachusetts general law related to truancy. We're also proposing that we discontinue the no credit policy that has been in place for many years. Tardies are also relevant here because tardies will no longer lead to unexcused absences that ultimately can be converted to a failing grade. And this will also align with the district's plan to shift to a competency-based grading model. Throughout the policy, we have revised the language so that it is student-centered and non-punitive. We've removed procedures that are no longer relevant, such as attendance waivers. We've eliminated the use of the language habitual school offender, which is no longer reflected in the state statute, and that was in consultation with the Office of Legal Advisor. And we've also updated the process so that school leader decisions around filing a child requiring assistance are in line with the spirit and protocol of the BPS Code of Conduct. The proposed policy changes aligns with the district priorities while revising components that are widely viewed as punitive by students and community stakeholders have proven ineffective in decreasing the district's chronic absenteeism rate, which has hovered around 25% for the better part of a decade, and the efficacy of which has been called into question by contemporary research on effective strategies to reduce absenteeism. So, as I've mentioned, a key focus of the revised policy is an emphasis on chronic absenteeism. So when we're looking at chronic absenteeism, the definition is a student missing 10% or more of school days for any given time period. And one thing that's important to note as it relates to chronic absenteeism is that both what historically have been known as excused and unexcused absences are included in the calculation. So this means that it really, from the perspective of learning and instructional time, all absenteeism can have a detrimental impact on student outcomes. So the policy has really been revised to focus on chronic absenteeism. We know that we've had historical trends where student demographic groups have had higher chronic absenteeism rates perpetually over time. We see that year to date for the current school year, our Black and Latinx students are both have chronic absenteeism rates that are 6% higher than our district-wide average. And we also know that year to date for the current school year, our English learners and students with an IEP have 3%, 11% higher chronic absenteeism respectively. And this again follows historical trends. There's also a considerable focus on prevention and intervention in the new policy. So we are identifying strategies that are categorized across tiers using a multi-tiered system of support to address attendance from a prevention and intervention perspective. We're also detailing how school staff and staff across the district should be using the systems to monitor attendance and report attendance. So it outlines, for instance, the use of reporting attendance through the Aspen Student Information System, as well as the planning of student success interventions using the Panorama platform, intervention monitoring, and goal setting with students using Panorama. We also really took a close look at the no credit policy and really scrutinized this policy. We looked at year-to-date data, so you can see that here our Black students have a disproportionately higher issuance of a grade of no credit for the first marking period for the current school year, and that was particularly alarming. And we also looked at some historical data as well. So going back to last year, we saw that, for example, students with disabilities and our English learners had disproportionately higher issuance of no credit grade. So what's important to keep in mind is with a no credit grade, ultimately this can be converted to a failing grade, and it is exclusively tied to a student's attendance. So in terms of some of the proposed revisions to the no credit policy, here you can see the way the prior policy was written. And of course, we're currently under the current interim attendance protocol that has been approved by the school committee, where the superintendent circular around attendance is suspended for the current school year. We do not have a no credit policy in place. It's suspended for the current school year. So what we're proposing is to discontinue the no credit policy permanently. And part of the rationale for that is the no credit policy, if you look at the way it has been written historically, a student could get 4 absences in a marking period. And based on the processes in that school or based on the whims of a particular educator or school leader, that student could receive a no credit that ultimately would be converted potentially to a failing grade, regardless of whether the student demonstrated the competency to pass the course. And if you add up, all of the terms in a school year, whether it is a school that has 4 marking periods or 3 marking periods, that student wouldn't even be considered chronically absent for the school year, but they could still potentially receive an NC grade. So what we're proposing with the revised policy is actually that schools, staff, and school leaders should be using a grade of incomplete. So absences may still impact student grades if they miss assignments or they miss a test, they miss instructional time, but we don't want to see that it's exclusively tied to attendance, regardless of whether the student demonstrated the competency to pass the course. So the use of the incomplete will still, you can see in the language, it still offers the directive that all students should be given the opportunity to equitably recover any lost learning time or missed instructional time during a marking period. So it's not as though we're taking away a backstop that affords students the opportunity to make up work and pass a course, but we want to eliminate inequities as it relates to the application of the no credit policy exclusively tied to attendance. And one other thing I failed to mention previously, we also looked at the application of the no credit policy across schools. And there were considerable inequities there where, for instance, with the first marking period for the current school year, less than about half of the high schools had actually issued grades of no credit. And then among the high schools that had issued grades of no credit, the number of students who had received at least one no credit grade ranged from 1 to 284. So a really wide disparity in terms of the application of the policy. And this is also viewed as something that's part of BPS really becoming an anti-racist institution, where we're really scrutinizing our policies and making sure that we have an equity lens in all facets of the policy, and conducting widespread stakeholder engagement to get feedback and revise policies in a way that makes sense for our students to best support our students and families. And with that, I will turn it back over to Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marks, for your presentation. I will now open it up to committee members. If you have questions, please remember our 5-minute, oh, sorry, Superintendent, I'll let you go. Please remember the 5-minute rule we all have to ask questions. I can go around a second time if you have more questions. And also for the staff side, it's just you, Mr. Marks, and the superintendent, but also to be brief so we can ask our questions. But please go ahead. Sorry, Dr. Cassellius.
I just want to thank Mr. Marks for his incredible work on this policy. When I first got to Boston, this is one of the first policies that I reviewed and felt like it was incredibly inequitable in terms of how we would assign students failure grades solely based on their attendance. It had nothing to do with their academics at all. And as you know, I wanted to take on a number of policies that I reviewed when I first came. And so we'll be bringing you several policies that are older and haven't been revised in a very long time, and taking a real equity lens toward those policies. And this is the first that we're bringing to you permanently, to change the policy. We suspended it last May, suspended it again this year, but we need to make this a permanent change. So thank you, Mr. Marks, for your work on this.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Robinson?
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. One, I'm just wanting to make sure I understand the definition of circulars, which I guess are actually our policy papers. It's one of those words that we use in the district, but I'm not always sure how that would translate into the other languages that we use. So are our circulars our particular policies?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Just wanted that, yeah.
Ms. Robinson, it's the way that we actually enact the policy. So you pass the policies, and then the circular is the direction to the school principals and how they actually have to enact it. Gives a
Okay.
little bit more guidance to it.
Yes. And then I guess the other issue is, as I think about this overall, the policy to me seems like it has different, the reasons behind the absences may differ when it's elementary school versus high school issues. And the question is, how do we look into why people are absent, and what kind of connection with helping parents understand absentee policies and the ramifications for taking children out of school to travel for the holidays, et cetera, and how that impacts their grades at the lower ends versus high school students who personally may decide to show up or not show up. So how do we help both the students, but also the families understand the ramifications of those choices or actions?
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. So really, I referenced the Panorama Student Success Platform, and that really offers a district-wide opportunity to capture the reasons behind absences, to document the communication with families, to really provide the imperative to a platform really to ensure accountability, that we're reaching out to all students who have struggled with absenteeism, to better understand what the family challenges are, to document any referrals to support services and so forth. So that's a critical piece of gaining consistency around a tiered approach to attendance. And we have some other systems that we've implemented, and we're working with schools to better support their approach to attendance across tiers. One is our tiered attendance system, where we provide direct consultation to schools, and it's really customized according to what that particular school is doing well, where they're having challenges, and we're able to differentiate the approach based on the grade levels within a particular school. So for instance, mentorship is a really critical piece at the high school level that has a huge impact on student attendance.
Great, thank you.
Dr. Coleman?
Great. This is very exciting work, and can see how we're moving away to policies that are about learning, about supporting students, finding where they are, and that's very much, as you say, reflects our goals to reduce the systematic barriers to success that we know are driven by a lot of factors, often out of the child's control. The question I have is, we make this change, and we still have kids who are struggling in classes and absenteeism. How are we using either our site-based councils or our school equity roundtables to kind of capture that data and identify by school what we're trying to do, both collectively as a school to make it more engaging and exciting for kids to be in, and also responding to the needs of their children. I suspect, I hypothesize, that when you look across the district, there's going to be a range of schools where there's going to be a variety of attendances, and some will have more of a struggle than others. And how do we collect what those schools are doing and then see how that aggregates across the district? Because, well, and then who's driving the change? When we see it is at the district-wide level, but the action we know happens at a more local level. And I'm wondering if there's a way we can figure out, like, tracking this data, this particular problem. How do we track that so we can see both where it's happening and then where the responses, the interventions are occurring that work, so we can spread it more systematically across the school? And so that I don't need an answer now. If you have the system and you have the flow chart for me already, I love it. But if not, I think that is something that we're requesting, and particularly who at each school, who's responsible for holding this data and responding to this data, and how do we know it's working or not working, and then watch that aggregate up through a region and through the district.
Yeah, so I think I can respond to some of that question and recommendation. Again, I think Panorama is a platform that's enabling us to look at school level data, regional data that's being communicated out on a consistent basis, so that school superintendents are armed with that information. As we get more consistency in the support staff that are in schools, for instance, family liaisons, we've met with them recently, and I know they've been trained on the Panorama platform. They're implementing efforts around supporting attendance in schools. The school site councils, as you can see in the policy, still retain a really critical role in helping to guide some of the attendance practices where there is some school-based decisions that need to be made. And then I know, for example, our supervisors of attendance, we've really shifted their approach from just purely being focused on it as a truancy officer in the court process to really be focused on the school level support and working with school success teams and working with attendance teams. And they've also actually been involved with the community equity roundtables at the school level. But part of what we're trying to do, at least within our department, I know within other departments as well, is to be, just like you mentioned, be able to identify the practices that are really strong and then share those practices with other schools that have similar grade range, demographic makeup, student population, and so forth.
Great, and this is part of our complicated challenge. I don't want to be part of a district that's playing gotcha with principals and schools and site councils. I don't want to be part of that, but I do want to be part of a district that is holding the sites accountable. And so how do we manage this, high expectations, high support to each school? Because as we know, there are kids with chronic absenteeism. I'm sure we have schools that have chronic absenteeism, and they don't need more finger pointing, but do they need more support? And how do we track how well we're doing it? So I'm glad that you're using that reporting system and looking forward to finding a way that we can see how that it's accruing across the district and regions to make this change that we all desire.
Yeah, Dr. Coleman, I just want to share that during this year in particular, we have really been running down these no credits. Our school superintendents, Dr. Bergerman and Dr. McIntyre, have been working with the heads of schools because we wanted to clear up the incompletes, clear up the no credits. The kids need to be credit ready for earning their diploma. They've been working with Mr. Marks on the attendance data and the student out, what are they called? SOAs, the student attendance officers, I think.
Supervisors of attendance, yeah.
Yeah, supervisors of attendance have been really working on trying to bring this down. And I know Mr. Harris has been here reporting previously on the efforts of trying to address the chronic attendance problems that we've been having.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Are there other questions from committee members? Vice Chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Marks, for this presentation and Superintendent as well. An operational question, then more of a philosophical one. The operational one is, we mentioned about Panorama and Aspen. What % of our schools are using both of those?
Well, 100% are using Aspen.
No, not 100. We have a couple of
Okay.
Horace Mann charters who aren't using Aspen. So there's a handful of our schools who don't use the Aspen SIS system, the student information system.
And how about Panorama?
I don't know the exact, if Monica Hogan is still on the call, she may know the exact number.
Say my name and I will come, Dr. Yeah, so I will say I don't have the exact usage data in front of me, though I'm certainly happy to provide that follow-up, Mr. O'Neill.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
I believe when we shared that earlier, I believe it was in January, we had about 50% of school staff who were actively using Panorama and logging in. I think different schools are at different points in their implementation. And so as we're moving into year 2 of implementing Panorama district-wide, we're thinking about how do we differentiate training and supports for schools who may not have used it much this year versus some of our other schools who have had support from Brian and his team and other central office staff to sort of take them to the next level of what do you do, what can the system do beyond sort of that first logging in and making an initial plan. So
thank you for that. I don't want to veer too far away from this presentation, but it does beg the question, you know, as we try to get better of understanding our students, our student bodies, our student outcomes, right? As we as a school committee are trying to be more focused on student outcomes, you know, systems are so important, and you have garbage in, garbage out, but you also have good systems that there are benefits to using. So, you know, how do we believe that Panorama, excuse me, is an effective system? And if so, how do we get that message across? How do we get that usage up?
yeah, I think that's a really complex question. And one of the ways we like to talk about Panorama is it's really a technical tool to help us solve an adaptive problem. And so one of the challenges, I've been in the district since 2014. And one of the things that I've heard regularly is, you know, I don't have easy access to information, and where do I find this? And so one of the problems Panorama has immediately helped us solve is get that information and data into the hands of educators in an easy way. So it's much more, it's like easier to click through than Aspen for educators. You know, there's colors and graphs, and it triangulates assessment data with course grades and attendance in a way that Aspen is just not designed to do in a visual manner. So I think it's the first step to helping schools get quicker access so they're not spending their time building spreadsheets to try and understand this on their own. So I think it's a multi-year process, and it's just one piece of sort of our ecosystem of data that we're using to help support schools.
Yeah, great, thank you. And it brings me to the second one, which is more of a point. I applaud the efforts to look at all of our policies through an equity lens, and to take away you know, you talk about carrot and stick, right? So we're taking away this stick, so to speak, on attendance, which particularly we see that there's unequal results here. And so I appreciate what the superintendent's doing to support it. I want to echo what Dr. Coleman said, and that is, I think we need to also be focusing much more on how we encourage students to attend, to be at school, the benefits of it. We have seen so clearly in all the research, you know, chronic absenteeism is just one of the leading indicators, right, of our students that struggle the most. And we have seen that across the board. And as we as a school committee are talking about our goals and our values, and, focusing on student outcomes, particularly that career and college career and life readiness one. We know from all the research that has been presented to us that chronic absenteeism is just one of the key blockers on this. So as we move away from thinking of it as a punishment tool, and I'm glad we're doing that, thinking more about how we incentivize and encourage our students when we are back to some semblance of normal, obviously, how we encourage them to see why it's important to be in class should be paramount to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other questions from committee members? I do have a couple of questions. Thank you again, Mr. Marks, for the report. I have to say, like, the inequity that was shown is just, it's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. I have no words. My questions are around, you talked about the competency base, which I think is great. And I'm just wondering how we're going to be doing that. I assume that's like a long-term approach. And I wonder also if we have some schools that are already doing competency-based, especially our alt ed programs, if we can learn from some of them that are doing that and taking those practices. So I'm just wondering, like, what is your vision around that? And if you don't have the answer right now, it's okay, because I know there's a lot of moving parts, but I assume it's just a long-term thing that we're going to build up to. Yes, okay. And my other question is around the panorama. I'm curious because I've never used it before. Does it have the capability? It sounds like it has the capability of having the early warning signs. And if so, and that's great, I'm glad. How does that work on the school level? So, like last school year, my daughter had 50 assignments that were not turned in, 50, not 5, not 15, 50. And, I think of, like, as a parent, like, how do we make sure, that on the school level, like, that we're communicating really early with families, so that we don't get to that place of, and she's only in, elementary school, so it's not as dire. But when I think of, like, a high school student falling really behind and what that means, who is on the school level, like, who's in charge of that? Because it's also, I don't want to say, like, every teacher, it has to be like a systemic thing. And I'm just wondering if there's some thought around that.
Yeah, so I don't know if Brian, you want to speak to missing assignments, but that's a little.
No, I was just using an example, like,
Yeah, so I mean, and Monica can speak to the particulars of what we can house in Panorama and the kind of reporting that can be available to our school teams and our student support teams. Not every school has a student support team. We don't have common grading protocols and standards across. So Mr. De Araujo, that's another piece. We don't have common grading practices across our schools. We don't have common graduation requirements across our schools. And so when you don't have these common standards that are set, and expectations, it's hard to hold your school leaders or your teachers accountable. And then you have to have a place for that information to be stored, and then whole processes around the expectation for how they communicate to families, when they communicate to families, what they communicate to families, how frequently they do. And so, it all just it's a whole system that's in place. You hear Mr. Harris, our chief accountability out. Look at him putting his light on. That's so funny, because we were just talking about it today that, you only rise to the level of your systems in an organization is what he's always reminding us. So this is the deeper level of work that we're unpacking here, but it starts with policy, because policy is what sets the expectation. And then we provide our training around policy, and we provide all of the support systems and tools that we use. And then we have monitoring systems, and we set those up, and then we hold them accountable. And so that's kind of how that works. I don't know, Monica, if you wanted to share something, or Corey, if you want to say something.
Organizations don't rise to the level of their goals, they rise to the level of their systems. And, it's not just about holding, school-based staff accountable. It's also about having the data so that you can figure out how to support them. And right now, there's so much variability, it's hard for us to figure out how we can provide uniform, universal support to our schools. But we are really focused on supporting, really bringing clarity to the role of SSTs and helping our schools build out their multi-tiered system of supports. So that's something we're currently organizing around and hoping to be able to support in a more targeted way across all schools next school year.
And I would say we're not hoping, we're actually working on it. So Corey and his team have been working on it with Monica and this panorama. We introduced it last year in May as part of reinventing the student support team process, and asked them to do that as part of our remote learning plan, because we knew that there would be need for recovery and makeup from that year. And now we're a year later, and we've been doing training with our school teams and really expecting them to step up. I see us making this mandatory in the future across schools.
Okay, thank you. I totally agree, and I'm glad to hear about the deep look at the supports, because I think that policy can only be as good as the implementation, because we could have this policy and we could come back next year if there aren't those supports. I think, it can just be something that's on paper and never. So I'm glad to hear all that. So thank you for that. And then my last comment, I think, is just related to what the vice chair said. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have so many examples. I think automatically of a young man who's a BPS graduate that was in my program and came to the organization and was failing out of school. And really it was about relationships. So the relationship we had with him and then with the school and how we worked together to kind of wrap our arms around that student. And he became engaged in our music program. And he got really interested in like the engineering side of it. And we worked with him, he got accepted to college, he went to a community college and then transferred and just got into Wentworth, and he's studying engineering and he's about to graduate. And so I think there's, so much that I'm excited about that college and career goal, because not, every student is different. Not everybody, I know that I have a hard time sitting here all these hours and focusing, and being in school and sitting like, I'm really excited about the reimagine piece and how we can reimagine school and, using internships and using things, as the vice chair said, to kind of like get students excited that it's not just like sitting, at a desk. So anyway, preaching to the choir, I know. So any other questions before we wrap up? No. Okay. Any final thoughts, Mr. Marks or Superintendent?
I'll defer to you, Dr.
Okay.
No, I just again want to thank the team. This is really exciting to me. I am so ready to bring forward these policies that I believe are barriers to our students and their learning. And I really want to thank the team for stepping into this and getting these across the finish line, because they are so important to setting the standard and the expectation so we can get the work then moving.
Yep. And I want to thank you, Superintendent, for bringing this forth, because, as a school committee, we're definitely working on all of the policies and we're going to document them. We're going to have them online. We're working on that. So the public has them, the school committee has them, but we don't know. Many of us have only been on the school committee for less than a year or a couple of years, 8 years, but we still don't know all the policies. So we thank you for bringing that, these inequitable policies that we need to look at. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Mr. Marks. So the committee looks forward to taking action on this recommendation at our next meeting on April 28th. And so we're now going to move on to public comment on reports. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. We have no speakers for public comment on reports.
Okay. Any new business? Okay, so this concludes our business. For this.
Actually, Alex, sorry.
Okay, no, go ahead.
I was slow. I'm not sure this is new business, but because I think it's going to come up. So I just want to, this is actually for the superintendent, pretty much as we get prepared, because we have two big conversations coming forward, one about Mass Core, and the other is about the issues with our goals and our values. And so I just think it's an opportunity to be clear about what I'm hoping as a superintendent comes forward next week, really about Mass Core, is as you work with your principals and your staff, thinking about what's best for all our kids, I just need to be clear as a committee member, the variations of what we expect out of our children, she even talked about tonight in terms of attendance, is just not healthy for the district as a whole. I think there's some schools that may serve, some people may serve, but the district as a whole. So I just want to emphasize from my perspective as a committee member that finding coherence, common standards, common expectations, to me, is part of driving whole district quality. And I believe in the power of individual principals and the power of individual teachers. Those are incredibly important. I don't want to squash that, but it has to be fitting within a coherent system. So as you come forward and have those conversations, I just want to be publicly clear that one of the things that I need to be clear about, if we don't go forward with Mass Core, what's the head and shoulders above alternative? Not just that that's bad, that's not working for me, as well, what's the better alternative going to be coherent to expectation for kids? That's one thing I want to share with you as a committee member in terms of expectations. And then the other, I think, is a more problematic issue in many ways that, we as a committee have made a pretty clear commitment that we feel getting it's dangerous if we get too far away, try to do too many things at once. And that we have felt that we are better served getting a more laser-like focus on a few things we want to move about what children know and are able to do. And we came to that consensus. Now, what that should be, I think no one's perfect and we can look at that, but I want to communicate, I guess, to my peers that for me, that is a valuable step forward for the district to really focus on a few areas that we want kids to know and be able to do. And what are the values or the tactics or lead indicators for that? And how do we go forward with fidelity? Getting that clear for us right now is our only way to support you, Dr. Cassellius. We have to be clear about what we're looking for and not have all the ambiguity where, oh, you said you're going to do this, but you didn't do that. So therefore something's going wrong. And I really, as everyone knows, I'm concerned, and Vice Chair Neal brought this up. There's this negative narrative in this community about what Boston schools are trying to do. It's the best place to be a Black boy in the country as a school district. Our improvement on graduation rates is phenomenal. Slow, not good enough, but I think I really want to use this goals and values to change the narrative, to really focus on what we're trying to do, measure where we're not going to be good enough, and make change, and not be swallowed up by a theory of ill content. So that's not so much for you, Dr. Cassellius. Certainly the high school expectations is very much something that we're looking forward to you bringing forward. And then I want to share with my committee members the real strong feeling that I have that we will make a big jump forward if we can come to an agreement. And I don't think we're going to get consensus right away, but just agreement on what those goals are and what are the 4 or 5 major values we want to represent, get it going, and then change. Waiting to get it going, I think, doesn't serve our children. That's my rant for the evening. I'm sorry, but we're ending so early. I had energy and time to come up with that. So sorry, Chair.
Not at all. Not at all. I appreciate your comments. Anyone else? Vice Chair? You're on mute. There you go.
Dr. Coleman, thank you for your comments. I'm often struck by the line that the pursuit of perfection often impedes improvement. And so this is a continuous process of improvement that we're trying to make, whether it's Mass Core, whether it's our goals and values. And compromise is not a 4-letter word. We all have to, we push, and the chair and I in particular, representing a number of the members or the committee as a whole, have met with a number of groups, and we're so appreciative they are in fact reaching out and giving us our feedback, giving us their feedback, and have engaged in the process. And they have been wonderful, rich conversations that I hope turn into regular opportunities, and that other members can join in as well, because it allows us to have conversations that we can't do in this forum. We sit at this forum, we get public comment, and by Robert's Rules of Order, we can't respond back, right? And so the opportunity to have engagement and conversations, many of our fellow members are on these individual task forces, whether it's ELL or Opportunity Achievement Gap, et cetera. But the opportunity to have conversations, to get feedback, to get input, that's great. But we also have to remember that at the end of the day, we're compromising because we're trying to do a bunch of different viewpoints together. You know, and I know they say a camel is a horse made by a committee, and we don't want to, you know, we don't want to put together a document that just has everything that everyone wants and then washes away the meaning of what we're trying to do. And so I hope folks, exactly as you said, Dean Coleman, let's agree on what we can agree on, move forward, and also have the spirit that we're going to continue to adapt and grow and adjust as we learn from this, that they are living, breathing documents, not, you know, something that's going to be agreed to once and can never be changed. But I'm really encouraged by this, and this is a healthy process that we're going through to get feedback and to work towards consensus. And I applaud the chair for her true leadership on this effort.
Yeah, I agree. And so, Madam Chair, the point of business, an idea that I would like us to address that we came up in our consulting process is the structure of our task force versus committee work, and that is something that I would like us to follow up on the consultant's suggestion, that we identify, be clear about tasks. He suggested task force are time-limited activities to provide, solve particular problems. The exams for the exam schools would be an example of that. Whereas a committee would be a committee would be kind of a joint working group with the district, the school committee, and the community, that would raise a level of expertise and understanding and depth and opportunity to communicate about these complex issues. So, you know, it's one of the great honors of my public service to be on the Opportunity Achievement Task Force, because of the work that Jerry Ayala and the rest of the committee do to really raise up these issues and have really driven real system change across the system about how we think about equity and opportunity. The work coming out of the ELL task force is very similar, but I'm wondering whether we need to reconfigure and use them differently. So for example, the one that I am most concerned with is I don't think the school quality task force is appropriately assigned, particularly as we think through what the outcomes of not having MCAS data for 2 years. You know, where's the existing community group that is involved in that can then provide a good feedback loop for the committee. So that is something that I would like to, not next month, not right away, but I want to lift up as something I think we need to bring on our agenda as one way to improve the quality, the process and quality of our work.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. That is part of our next steps after we vote on our goals and guardrails, is looking at how we are evaluating that. What are the, beyond the metrics, how we talk about it, how we line up our agendas to those goals. And the next piece of work is the task force and looking at that. So I agree. So thank you both for your comments. And so this concludes our business for this evening. The next school committee meeting will take place on Wednesday, April 28th at 5 p.m. on Zoom. And if there's nothing further, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, can you please call the roll?
Dr. Coleman,
Yes, and have a great evening, everybody.
Mr. DeRusso,
Yes, thank you.
Dr. Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver Davila.
Yes, and have a great vacation to all of our school staff, educators, families. Have a great April break, and we'll see you when we come back. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Good night.
Good night.